They said rejection was a kindness, a mercy. But standing here in the frozen mud outside Shadowfang territory, watching the only home I'd ever known disappear behind ice-twisted trees, I finally understood the truth. Rejection wasn't mercy, it was murder. The slow kind. The kind that doesn't stop your heart all at once but carves it out piece by piece until you're hollow enough to fill with something else, something darker. An Alpha King Kael Shadowfang, the man who swore before the moon goddess to protect me, had just become my executioner. If you want to see how a broken Luna becomes a queen who brings empires to their knees, you better stick around till the end. Hit that like and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. The ceremony hall still smelled like celebration when Kael's words cut through it like a blade through bone. Celine stood in the center of the grand stone chamber, her ceremonial dress the color of moonlight, silver embroidery climbing up the bodice like frozen vines. Every wolf in the Shadowfang pack surrounded her in concentric circles, their eyes glowing amber in the torchlight. The elders sat on their elevated platform, ancient faces carved from disapproval and tradition. And there, on the dais before the throne, stood Kael, Alpha King, her mate, her destroyer. He didn't look at her when he said it. That was the part that would haunt her later, in the long dark nights ahead. He stared past her shoulder, jaw tight, those storm-gray eyes fixed on something only he could see. You are not fit to stand beside me as Luna Queen. I, Alpha King Kael of Shadowfang, reject you, Celine Vayner, as my mate and queen. The bond snapped. Not slowly, not gently. It tore through her chest like a hook ripping free, dragging half her soul with it. Celine's knees buckled. She caught herself on instinct, fingers splayed against the cold stone floor, gasping as phantom claws shredded her from the inside. The pain was white-hot and everywhere, 1,000 small deaths happening simultaneously in her blood. No one moved to help her. Around the hall, wolves shifted on their feet. Some looked away. Others watched with the cold calculation of predators witnessing weakness. Elder Morrigan leaned forward in her seat, satisfaction gleaming in her milk-pale eyes. The girl was never strong enough, Morrigan said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. A Luna must be a warrior. A queen must command respect. This one can barely shift without trembling. Celine's fingers curled against stone. Through the haze of agony, she forced her head up. Kael still wouldn't look at her. His hands were fists at his sides, knuckles white, but his face remained carved from ice. You don't even have the courage to face me, she said. Her voice came out raw, scraped hollow. You're going to throw me away like trash, and you can't even look at me while you do it. Kael's jaw worked. For one brief moment, something flickered across his features. Pain, maybe. Regret. Then it vanished behind the mask of the Alpha King. This isn't personal, he said flatly. This is for the kingdom. Elder Corvus rose from his seat, robes sweeping the floor. The pack needs strength. Shadowfang stands at the edge of war with 4 neighboring territories. We cannot afford a weak Luna. We cannot afford sentiment. Sentiment. As if 3 years of devotion, of standing beside Kael through every challenge, of bleeding for this pack, could be reduced to sentiment. Celine dragged herself upright, legs shaking, the bond's absence a howling void in her chest where warmth used to live. I've trained every day since I arrived, she said. I've learned your laws, your strategies, your history. I've earned my place here. You've earned nothing. Morrigan's voice cut like a whip. You come from nowhere. A rogue family with no name, no legacy, no power. The royal bloodline of Shadowfang will not be diluted by common weakness. Something ancient stirred in Celine's blood then, a whisper of heat that didn't belong to the wolf she'd always known. It flickered and died before she could grasp it, leaving only confusion in its wake. Kael finally met her eyes. What she saw there broke something beyond the bond. His gaze was empty, resolved. The man who had laughed with her in the forest, who had whispered promises against her skin under starlight, who had traced the curve of her face like she was something precious. That man was gone. In his place stood a king who had made his choice. Leave Shadowfang territory by dawn, Kael said. If you're found within our borders after sunrise, you'll be treated as a hostile rogue. The hall erupted, not with protest, with approval. Wolves howled their agreement, the sound rising to the vaulted ceiling like a war cry. Celine stood alone in the center of it all, the noise crashing over her in waves. Her wolf whimpered in the back of her mind, confused and grieving, unable to understand why their mate had become their enemy. Celine looked at each of the elders in turn. Morrigan's satisfaction, Corvus's cold calculation. The others wore masks of indifference or disgust. Then she looked at Kael one last time. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. Not a threat, a certainty. She turned and walked through the crowd. Wolves parted before her like she carried disease. No one spoke to her. No one met her eyes. The girl who had arrived 3 years ago with hope burning in her chest, who had believed in the bond and destiny, in the fairy tale of true mates, that girl died with every step toward the doors. The night air hit her like a fist, cold, sharp, the kind of cold that got into your bones and made a home there. Celine kept walking, through the courtyard, past the guards who watched her with contempt, into the forest beyond the walls where darkness waited between the trees. She made it half a mile before her legs gave out. Celine collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine, bark rough against her back, and finally let the sobs come. They tore out of her in ugly, gasping waves. Her wolf howled inside her mind, a keening wail of loss and confusion. The bond's absence was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat felt wrong without the echo of his. But underneath the grief, underneath the agony, something else stirred. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The kind that burned slow and thorough and turned everything it touched to ash. Celine's fingers dug into the frozen earth. Her nails split. Blood welled up, dark against the snow. They thought she was weak. They thought she was nothing. They would learn. 3 days later, Celine stood at the edge of the northern reach, where Shadowfang territory ended and the Frostlands began. She'd walked through the night after the rejection, putting distance between herself and the pack that had discarded her. No supplies, no plan. Just the clothes on her back and the certainty that returning would mean death, either by their teeth or by the slow poison of staying somewhere she wasn't wanted. The Frostlands stretched before her like an open wound in the world. Endless white, jagged mountains in the distance, their peaks lost in clouds. This was the place wolves whispered about in warnings. The place where the old magic still lived, wild and untamed. Where rogues went to die. Celine stepped across the boundary. The temperature dropped immediately, cold sinking through her inadequate dress like knives. Her wolf whimpered, weakened by the rejection, barely able to lend her warmth. But Celine kept walking, one foot in front of the other, into the white. By sunset, she'd lost feeling in her hands. By midnight, her lips had cracked and bled. By dawn, she was lost. The storm came out of nowhere, a wall of white that swallowed the world. Wind tore at her, driving snow into her eyes, her mouth, stealing her breath. Celine staggered forward blindly, arms wrapped around herself, searching for shelter that didn't exist. The cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was a living thing, hungry, trying to pull her down into the snow to sleep forever. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the drifts. She went down hard, face first into ice. The impact drove the air from her lungs. For a long moment, she just lay there, body screaming, mind fuzzy with hypothermia. "Get up," her wolf whispered weakly. "Get up, or we die here." Maybe that was easier. Maybe dying in the white was better than surviving with half a soul. Maybe Kael had done her a favor, speeding up the inevitable. No. The thought came from somewhere deep, somewhere that existed before the bond, before Shadowfang, before everything. A core of iron that even rejection couldn't break. I'm not dying for him. I'm not dying because they decided I wasn't enough. Celine dragged herself upright. Her vision swam. The world tilted. She took one step, then another. The storm raged around her, but she kept moving, driven by spite and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to let them win. She didn't see the cliff until she was already falling. The ground disappeared beneath her feet. For one weightless moment, Celine hung in the air, snow and sky and earth all mixed together. Then gravity remembered her. She hit the slope and rolled, body smashing against rocks hidden in the drifts, ribs cracking, air exploding from her lungs. Down and down and down, the world a tumbling nightmare of white and pain. She stopped at the bottom of a ravine, half buried in snow, broken and bleeding and barely conscious. Above her, the storm howled its victory. Celine's eyes fluttered shut. Musk. She woke to warmth. Not the gentle kind. The searing kind, like her blood had turned to liquid fire. Celine gasped, back arching, fingers clawing at whatever was beneath her. Not snow, furs. She was lying on furs in front of a fire, and her body was burning from the inside out. Easy, child. A woman's voice, old and smoke-rough. The awakening is always painful. Celine's eyes snapped open. She tried to sit up, but her body refused, muscles locked in agony. Through the haze of pain, she made out a small cave, flames dancing in a pit at its center. An old woman sat across from her, face weathered like ancient stone, eyes the silver white of a full moon. "What's happening to me?" Celine gasped. "What did you do?" "I did nothing." The woman stirred something in a clay bowl, steam rising. "Your blood did this. The rejection broke the seal your family placed on you generations ago. Now the old power wakes. I don't understand him." "The moonborn bloodline," the woman interrupted. "The royal line that ruled all wolves before the alphas rose up and tore the empire apart. Your ancestors were the first wolves, child, born directly from the moon goddess herself. Their power was absolute. That's why they were hunted to extinction, or so everyone believed." She held out the bowl. Celine stared at it, then at the woman. "Drink. It will ease the pain while your body adjusts. Why would you help me?" "Because I've been waiting a very long time for you to arrive." The old woman smiled, and there was something terrible in it. "I'm the last guardian of the moonborn legacy, and you, little broken Luna, are the key to everything." Celine's hands shook as she took the bowl. The liquid inside was bitter and burned all the way down, but within moments, the fire in her blood cooled to a manageable simmer. She could breathe again. Think again. "I'm nobody," she said. "I come from rogues. I don't have royal blood." The woman laughed, a sound like wind through dead trees. "That's what they wanted you to believe. Your mother's mother's mother fled the purge, hid among the rogues, bound her power so the alphas couldn't find her. Each generation did the same, sealing away the truth to protect their children. But blood will out, child, especially when it's tested." Celine looked down at her hands. They were covered in marks she'd never seen before, silver patterns that looked like frost, glowing faintly in the firelight. As she watched, they faded, sinking back beneath her skin. "What am I?" "You're the last of the royal line, the true queen of all wolves." The woman's silver eyes glittered. "And that alpha who rejected you has no idea what he just unleashed." Bashik. For 3 weeks, Celine lived in that cave while her body tore itself apart and rebuilt. The old woman, she gave no name, said names were for those who still lived among the packs, taught her the truth. About the moonborn empire that had once spanned continents. About the power her ancestors wielded, bending wolves to their will, commanding storms, living for centuries. About how the alphas had risen up, jealous and afraid, and drowned the royal line in blood. "Almost drowned," the woman corrected. "Your bloodline survived, hidden, scattered, waiting." "Why now?" Celine asked on the 4th day when she could finally stand without screaming. "Why is it waking now?" "Because you needed it." The woman handed her a wooden staff, gestured for her to attack. Power responds to desperation, to survival. Your mate's rejection broke the seal, yes, but your will to live activated what was sleeping. Now we see if you're strong enough to master it. The training was brutal. Every day the old woman pushed her past the point of collapse, teaching her to channel the power building in her blood, to shape it, control it. Celine learned to call flame, not normal fire, but silver moonfire that burned cold and ate through anything it touched. She learned to command lesser wolves with just her voice, bending their will to hers. She learned to heal wounds that should have killed her, her body knitting itself back together in minutes. But the hardest lesson was the cost. The power wants to consume you, the woman warned on the 10th day. The moonborn who fell to madness, who became tyrants, they forgot they were wolves first, queens second. They let the power decide. You must be stronger than that. Celine practiced until her nose bled silver, until her hands shook with exhaustion, until she could summon moonfire with a thought and extinguish it just as fast. On the 20th day, the old woman handed her a blade. "What's this for?" Celine asked. "For when you're ready to leave." The woman's expression was unreadable. This cave exists between worlds, hidden by old magic. Out there, the kingdoms are tearing themselves apart. War has come to Shadowfang. Packs are dying. And your former mate is failing. Celine's fingers tightened on the blade's hilt. She felt nothing at those words. No satisfaction. No pain. The part of her that had loved Kael Shadowfang had burned away in the awakening, reduced to ash. "That's not my problem, isn't it?" The woman tilted her head. "You carry royal blood. Every wolf in these lands is your subject, whether they know it or not. When the Empire fell, that responsibility didn't vanish. It's been waiting, just like your power. The question is whether you'll claim it. I don't want to rule anyone." "Then why are you still training? Why push yourself past breaking every single day?" The woman's eyes bored into hers. "You're not doing this to survive anymore, child. You're doing this to make them pay." Celine said nothing, because the old woman was right, and they both knew it. That night, alone in her corner of the cave, Celine stared into the fire and let herself remember. Kael's face, when he rejected her. The elder's satisfaction. The pack's contempt. Every moment of humiliation replayed in perfect detail. The old Celine would have wept. This Celine felt only cold calculation. On the 21st day, she told the woman she was ready to leave. The world beyond the cave had changed. Celine stood on a ridge overlooking the valleys below, wind whipping her hair around her face. She wore furs now, layered and practical, nothing like the ceremonial dress that had marked her as Luna. A blade hung at her hip. Her body was lean and hard, muscles earned through brutal training. And in her blood, power waited, coiled, and ready. Below, smoke rose from a dozen different points. Villages burning. The woman had spoken true. War had swallowed the northern territories while Celine had been reborn. A wolf's howl cut through the wind. Then another. A hunting party. Celine closed her eyes and reached for the new scents the training had developed. Wolves nearby. 6 of them. Rogues by the feel. Desperate and hungry. They'd caught her scent on the wind and were coming to investigate. To them, she was prey. A lone wolf in their territory. They'd learn. She didn't run. She waited on that ridge, perfectly still as the rogues emerged from the tree line. 6 males, all bigger than her, all bearing the scars of hard living. Their lips peeled back from their teeth as they surrounded her, cutting off escape. The largest one shifted to human form, naked and unashamed in the cold. His eyes raked over her with predatory interest. "You're a long way from any pack, little wolf," he said. His voice was rough, accent thick. "You lost or just stupid?" Celine regarded him calmly. "Neither." The rogue laughed. He had a nice laugh, she noted distantly. Shame about what came next. "Then you know how this works. Everything you have is ours now, including you, if you're smart enough to cooperate. I have a different proposal." Celine's hand rested on her blade's hilt. "Join me, or die." The rogues exchanged glances. Then they all laughed, the sound echoing across the ridge. The leader took a step closer, still grinning. "Join you." He shook his head. "I like you. Got fire. Tell you what, you come quiet. We'll make it quick and painless. You fight. We take our time. Your choice." Celine drew her blade. The laughter stopped. The leader's grin turned mean. He started to shift, bones cracking, fur rippling across his skin. The others followed his lead, dropping to all fours, surrounding her in a loose circle. 6 wolves against 1. Impossible odds by any normal measure. But Celine wasn't normal anymore. She reached into her blood, found the power waiting there, and pulled. Silver flames erupted around her in a circle, cold moonfire that burned without heat. The rogues yelped, scrambling back, confused and frightened by fire that shouldn't exist. Celine walked forward through the flames, untouched, blade gleaming. "I'll ask once more," she said, and her voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "Kneel or burn." The leader snarled and lunged. Celine moved like water, like moonlight, like something that had never been fully human. She sidestepped his attack, blade flashing, opening a line across his ribs. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to hurt. The wolf howled and spun, teeth snapping, but she was already gone, dancing between the others who tried to pin her. One leaped for her throat. She caught him midair with moonfire, silver flames wrapping around his body. He hit the ground writhing, not burning but paralyzed, nerves locked by magic older than memory. Another came from her blind side. She spun, kicked him in the jaw with enough force to crack bone, sent him tumbling down the ridge. The remaining three hesitated. Celine stood in the center of the circle, barely breathing hard, moonfire dancing along her arms. The leader lay at her feet, bleeding, defeated but not dead. She'd been careful. She needed them to carry the message. "I am Celine Moonborn," she said, and let the power fill her voice until it resonated like thunder. Last of the royal line. Queen of the old empire. Every wolf in these territories belongs to me, whether they acknowledge it or not. You have two choices. Kneel now and swear your loyalty, or run and tell everyone you meet that the Moonborn have returned. Silence. Then slowly the leader shifted back to human form. Blood ran down his side, but his eyes held a new expression. Recognition. Fear. Something like awe. "You're real," he whispered. "The legends, they're real." Celine waited. One by one, the rogues knelt, not out of love or respect, out of recognition of something in their blood, some ancient instinct that told them they were in the presence of something that commanded their submission. The leader bowed his head. "We serve, my queen." Well, word spread like wildfire through the Frostlands. Within days, rogues from across the northern territories came seeking her, some to pledge loyalty, others to challenge. All of them left either as followers or as warnings. Celine built her pack in the shadows, gathering the cast-offs and forgotten ones, the wolves who had nowhere else to go. But she didn't build it on fear alone. She was fair, brutal when necessary, but fair. She shared food equally, settled disputes with justice rather than favoritism, trained them in the old ways, teaching them to tap into the power that lived dormant in every wolf's blood, legacy of the Moonborn Empire they'd all descended from. Slowly, the pack grew. 50 wolves, then 100, then more. And in the depths of the Frostlands, Celine built something that hadn't existed in centuries. Not a pack, an army. Okay. 4 months after her rejection, news reached her camp that Shadowfang was under siege. Celine sat in her tent. She refused to call it a palace, though that's what her people wanted, listening to the scout's report. The messenger was a young female, quick and clever, one of her best. 3 packs have allied against them, the scout said. Iron Ridge, Blood Moon, and Nightfall. They're calling it revenge for territorial disputes, but everyone knows it's about power. They want to carve up Shadowfang and take the throne. How long until the capital falls? 2 weeks. Maybe less. The scout hesitated. They're saying Alpha King Kael is calling for aid from the southern kingdoms, but no one's answering. He's got enemies everywhere. Good, Celine said flatly. The scout shifted her weight. My queen, if Shadowfang falls, the war will spread. These territories will be next. And the civilians. I know. Celine stood, walked to the tent's entrance, stared out at her army training in the snow. Rogues who had been nothing, now warriors. Wolves who had been forgotten, now part of something greater. She felt their faith in her like a physical weight. Do you think I should help him? The man who threw me away like garbage. Tell me why I should lift one finger to save him. Because you're not him, the scout said quietly. That's the whole point, isn't it? You're better. Celine turned sharply. The scout met her eyes without flinching. You've built this pack on justice, on being different from the alphas who ruled through fear and cruelty. If you let innocents die because you want revenge on one man, you become exactly what they said you were. Weak. Ruled by emotion instead of wisdom. The words hit harder than they should have. Celine looked away, jaw tight, fighting the anger that wanted to rise. Get out, she said. The scout bowed and left. Alone in the tent, Celine closed her eyes and reached for the calm center the old woman had taught her to find. The power whispered in her blood, eager, wanting to be used, wanting to burn Shadowfang to ash and everyone in it. But the scout was right. Damn her, she was right. Celine wasn't doing this to become another tyrant. She was doing this to be better. To prove that the Moonborn line had earned its throne through more than just power. Through justice. through protecting all wolves, even the ones who'd hurt her. She stepped outside. Her army stopped training, turned to face her, waiting. Over 100 wolves, all looking to her for direction. She'd earned their loyalty by being strong, yes, but also by being fair, by caring about more than just her own vengeance. Celine took a breath and made her choice. "We march for Shadowfang," she called out, and her voice carried across the camp. "Not to save their king, to save their people, to prove that the Moonborn don't abandon innocents to war, no matter how much we've been wronged." The army howled their approval, the sound rising to the sky like a promise. Celine closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The moment everything changed. The moment she stopped being the rejected mate and became something else entirely. A queen. They reached Shadowfang territory on the 7th day of their march. The devastation was worse than the scouts had reported. Entire villages burned to foundations, bodies left where they'd fallen, wolves and humans alike, the enemy alliance too busy pushing toward the capital to waste time on burials. Celine's army moved through the carnage in grim silence. She found the first survivors huddled in a burned-out barn. 12 of them, mostly children and elderly, starving and terrified. When they saw Celine's forces, they cowered, expecting death. Celine knelt before them. She'd learned to control her power enough that only the faintest silver glow showed in her eyes, but it was enough. The survivors stared at her like she was a ghost. "You're safe now," she said. "We're here to help." An old male, gray-furred and scarred, squinted at her. "I know you. You're the rejected Luna, Kale's Shadowfang's cast-off." "I was." Celine's voice was steady. "Now I'm something else. And unlike your king, I don't abandon wolves in need." She left half her forces to escort the survivors to safety, to set up field hospitals and supply lines. The other half, she led deeper into Shadowfang territory, toward the capital where the final battle was brewing. They moved like ghosts through the forest, using the old paths her training had taught her to sense. Twice they encountered enemy patrols. Both times, Celine ended the fights before they began, moonfire erupting from her hands to drive the invaders into retreat, leaving them terrified and spreading rumors of a silver witch in the woods. Good. Let them be afraid. On the 9th day, they reached the ridge overlooking Shadowfang's capital. The city sprawled in the valley below, stone walls 30 feet high, towers rising toward the sky. But those walls were cracked now, breached in 3 places. Smoke rose from within. The enemy alliance had surrounded the city completely. Thousands of wolves in siege formation, trebuchets and siege towers already at work. It was over. Anyone could see that. Shadowfang was dying. Celine stood on that ridge with her commanders. The rogue leader she'd defeated first had become her general, loyal and capable, and studied the battlefield. Her strategist mind, trained by months of survival, saw all the ways this ended in blood. "We can't break a siege that size," the general said quietly, "even with moonfire. There's too many of them. I'm not here to break the siege." Celine's eyes tracked the enemy formations, noting their weaknesses. "I'm here to end the war." "How?" Celine smiled, and there was nothing warm in it, by reminding everyone why the Moonborn were feared. She turned to her army, raised her voice so all could hear. "Tonight, we strike their command center, kill their alpha leaders, scatter their forces. We move fast, we move quiet, and we show no mercy to those who wage war on the innocent. This ends tonight." The howls of approval echoed across the ridge. Below, some of the enemy wolves looked up, searching for the source of the sound. They'd find out soon enough. As her army prepared for the attack, Celine closed her eyes and reached deep into her power, deeper than she ever had before. The old woman's voice echoed in her memory. "The power wants to consume you. You must be stronger." "I am stronger," Celine whispered. "And tonight, the whole world learns what that means." They attacked at midnight, when the enemy camp was at its most vulnerable. Celine led from the front, moonfire blazing around her like wings, turning night into silver day. Her army poured down the ridge behind her, a howling wave of rage and power. The enemy sentries barely had time to sound the alarm before they were overwhelmed. Celine didn't fight like a normal wolf. She fought like a force of nature. Moonfire erupted from her hands in waves, consuming everything it touched. When wolves tried to surround her, she commanded them with her voice, ancient authority bending their will, turning them against their own allies. Her blade sang through the air, and everywhere she passed, the enemy fell. But she wasn't killing indiscriminately. The soldiers following orders, the ones trying to flee, she let them go. Only the commanders, the ones who'd chosen this war, faced her full fury. The enemy Alpha of Iron Ridge met her in the center of the camp. He was huge, battle-scarred, confident in his strength. He shifted to human form to taunt her. "You're just one wolf," he growled. "No matter what tricks you've learned, you can't stop 3 armies. Watch me." Selene unleashed everything. Moonfire exploded outward in a circle, forcing everyone back, leaving just her and the Iron Ridge Alpha in the center. He lunged, claws extended, aiming for her throat. She caught his wrist, twisted, felt bones crack. He howled and tried to pull free, but she held him with strength that shouldn't exist, power flowing through her in endless supply. "I am Selene Moonborn," she said, and let her eyes blaze pure silver. "Last daughter of the old empire. And your war ends now." She drove Moonfire into him, not to kill, to mark. Silver flames wrapped around his body, burning into his skin in permanent patterns, brands that would never fade. When she released him, he collapsed, screaming, covered in glowing scars. All around the camp, the fighting stopped. Wolves from both sides stared at her, at the burning Alpha at her feet, at the Moonfire that danced around her like a living thing. Selene raised her voice. "I am claiming blood right over these territories under the old law. Any wolf who continues this siege answers to me. Any who flees now will be spared. Choose." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, in ones and twos, and then in entire units, wolves began to retreat, backing away from her, from the branded Alpha, from the promise of power they couldn't comprehend. Within an hour, the siege was broken, 3 armies fleeing in different directions, too terrified to regroup. Selene stood in the center of the devastation, breathing hard, Moonfire slowly dying around her. Victory. But it tasted like ash. The gates of Shadowfang opened. Wolves poured out. Guards, soldiers, civilians who'd survived the siege. They stopped when they saw her, uncertain whether she was savior or new threat. And then, from the crowd, he emerged. Kyle Shadowfang, Alpha King, the man who'd rejected her. He looked like hell. Blood stained his armor. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken from sleepless nights and desperate fighting. But those storm-gray eyes hadn't changed. They locked onto her across the battlefield, and Selene saw everything in them. Shock, disbelief, recognition, horror. He knows, she realized. He can sense what I've become, what his rejection unleashed. Kyle walked toward her slowly, like approaching a wild animal. His people tried to stop him, but he waved them back. When he was 10 feet away, he stopped, opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Selene," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "What happened to you?" She could have said so many things, could have thrown his rejection back in his face, made him hurt the way she'd hurt. But standing there, looking at the man who'd destroyed her, Selene felt only exhaustion. "You did," she said simply. "You broke me. And I built myself into something you could never imagine." Behind Kyle, figures emerged from the gate. The elders. Morgan and Corvus and the others, faces pale, staring at Selene like she was a ghost. No, like she was judgment come to collect. "We didn't know," Morgan whispered. "Your bloodline. We had no idea." "You knew enough." Selene's voice cut like a blade. "You knew I was different. That's why you wanted me gone. You sensed the power in my blood and it terrified you, so you poisoned my mate against me and threw me away." She took a step forward. The elders flinched back. "I should burn this kingdom to ash for what you did to me. I should let you all die in the ruins of your prejudice and fear. That's what the old me would have wanted." "Then why are you here?" Kael asked quietly. "Because I'm better than you." Selene met his eyes. "Because I won't let innocents die for the sins of their leaders. Because someone has to be better, or this cycle never ends." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Wolves from Shadowfang and from her own army, all watching, all waiting to see what came next. The siege is broken. The enemy armies are scattered. But the corruption that led to this war still lives in these territories, still lives in the systems that give men like these the power to reject, to cast aside, to wage war on their own kind. That ends now. What are you saying? Corvus demanded. His voice shook. I'm saying the old order is dead. Celine raised her hand and moonfire danced along her fingers, beautiful and terrible. I'm saying the Moonborn have returned to claim what was always ours, and anyone who stands against me, who clings to the broken system of alpha kings and corrupt elders, will burn. The crowd erupted, some with cheers, others with fear. Kale just stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw the moment he understood. He'd rejected his true mate, and in doing so, he'd created his own destruction. Celine let the moonfire die. She was so tired suddenly. Tired of fighting, of proving herself, of being strong. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not when so much hung in the balance. Tomorrow, we rebuild, she said. Tonight, we mourn. She walked past Kael without another word. Past the elders who shrank from her, past the guards who didn't know whether to salute or flee. Her army fell in behind her, loyal and true, and together they disappeared into the night, leaving Shadowfang to wonder what storm had just passed through. In his chambers, alone, Kael Shadowfang pressed his fist against his chest where the bond used to live. Where nothing lived now but regret and the growing certainty that he'd made the worst mistake of his life. And in the mountains to the north, an old woman smiled into her fire, knowing the pieces were finally in motion. The real game was about to begin. The War Council met 3 days after the siege broke. Celine stood at the head of a makeshift table in what used to be a grain storage building on the outskirts of Shadowfang territory. She refused to enter the palace, refused to sit in rooms where the elders had decided her fate like she was livestock being appraised for slaughter. This place was neutral ground, and neutrality was all she could stomach right now. Her commanders filled the space, the rogue general who'd been first to kneel, a scarred female named Raven who'd survived 3 different pack purges, a young strategist called Frost, whose mind worked like a blade, cutting through problems to find solutions no one else saw. They were hers. Loyal, not because of bonds or tradition, but because she'd earned it in blood and moonfire. Across from them sat Kael's people, the Alpha King himself, looking like he hadn't slept since the siege. His beta, a massive wolf named Garrett with eyes that missed nothing, and 2 representatives from the civilian council, older wolves who'd survived the attack and now watched Celine like she might explode at any moment. The elders weren't invited. Celine had made that clear. We need to talk about what happens next, Kael said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. The enemy armies scattered, but they didn't dissolve. They'll regroup, and when they do... They won't, Celine interrupted. I sent hunting parties after each alpha. They're all branded now, marked with moonfire that won't fade. Every wolf in the northern territories will know they challenged the Moonborn and failed. No one will follow them into another war. Kael's jaw tightened. You marked them, like cattle, like warnings. Celine met his eyes without flinching. Would you prefer I killed them? Because that was the other option. Silence dropped over the table like a stone. Garrett shifted in his seat, hand moving unconsciously toward where his weapon would be. Celine's general noticed, tensed, ready to respond. The air thickened with the promise of violence. Everyone calm down, one of the civilian representatives said quickly. She was an older female, gray streaking her dark hair, eyes sharp with intelligence. We're here to prevent more bloodshed, not start it. Then let's talk solutions, Frost said. His voice was young but steady. The immediate threat is contained, but the underlying problems remain. 3 packs tried to destroy Shadowfang because they saw weakness. That weakness still exists. What weakness? Garrett demanded. Your entire system, Raven said flatly. Alpha kings who rule by strength alone. Elders who hoard power and manipulate from shadows. Packs divided into hierarchies where some wolves matter and others don't. That's what makes you vulnerable. That's why they attacked. Kael leaned forward. And your solution is what? Tear down everything we've built? Replace it with chaos? Replace it with something better. Celine's voice cut through the rising tension. The Moonborn Empire didn't survive for millennia by ruling through fear. It survived because every wolf had a place. Because power came with responsibility. Because the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. That's a fantasy, Kael said. Wolves are predators. We survive by being stronger than those who destroy us. Your ancestors knew that. That's why they conquered everything. My ancestors conquered because they had to unite the packs or watch them destroy each other, Celine shot back. Just like what's happening now. Your way led to this war. My way ends it. By making yourself empress. Garrett's tone was acid. By forcing everyone to bow to your power. Yes. Celine didn't blink. Because right now, I'm the only thing standing between these territories and complete annihilation. Don't like it? Find someone stronger. Until then, you deal with me or you die. Those are the options. The words hung in the air like a blade. Kale stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Pain, maybe. Recognition, definitely. This wasn't the soft-spoken Luna he'd rejected. This was something forged in ice and abandonment, tempered by survival into a weapon that cut both ways. What do you want? He asked quietly. Really? Strip away the politics and the power plays. What do you actually want, Celine? She could have lied, could have given him the answer that served her strategy, her plans, her vision for the empire she was building. But sitting there, looking at the man who'd destroyed her, Celine found herself speaking a truth she hadn't admitted even to herself. I want to matter, she said. I want every wolf who was told they were weak, who was cast aside, who was deemed unworthy. I want them to know they were lied to, that their value isn't determined by some alpha's opinion or some elder's prejudice. I want to burn down the system that measures worth and submission and rebuild it into something that doesn't crush people for being different. She stood, moonfire flickering faintly around her hands. An unconscious response to emotion, power rising to match her conviction. You asked what I want? I want to make sure no one else has to stand in front of their pack and hear that they're not enough. That's what I want. And I'll wade through rivers of blood to get it, if that's what it takes. The room was silent. Even Garrett had nothing to say to that. Kael's expression was unreadable, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the table edge. The civilian representative cleared her throat. That's admirable. Truly. But practically speaking, how do you plan to rebuild an entire social structure while also defending against external threats? The southern kingdoms are watching. When they see the north in chaos, they'll strike. Then we don't give them chaos, Frost said. We give them order, just a different kind. He looked at Celine. You've already started building it. Your pack doesn't follow traditional hierarchy. How's that working? Better than it should, the general admitted. Rogues don't usually cooperate. Too many trust issues, too much history. But she made it work. He nodded toward Celine. Fair distribution of resources. Merit-based leadership. Voice for everyone regardless of rank. It's messy sometimes, but it holds. Because they believe in it, Raven added. Because they chose it. That's the difference. Kael shook his head slowly. You're talking about revolutionizing wolf society. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes generations. We don't have generations, Celine said. We have months, maybe weeks before someone else decides to test us. So we move fast. Shadowfang becomes the model. We integrate my forces with yours, establish new governance structures, prove it can work. Then we expand. You mean conquer, Garrett said. I mean unite. Celine's eyes flashed silver. Packs can join willingly, or they can resist and be absorbed. Their choice. But the old way ends now, one way or another. And if I refuse? Kael's voice was soft but edged with something dangerous. If I say Shadowfang stays as it is, then you watch it burn. Celine didn't look away, because the next enemy won't scatter when I show up. They'll come prepared for moonfire and ancient power, and you can't fight that alone. You've already proven that. The words landed like blows. Kael flinched, actually flinched, and Celine felt nothing. The part of her that would have softened the truth, that would have cared about his pride, had died in the snow 4 months ago. This isn't personal, she continued, echoing the words he'd used when he rejected her. This is survival. For all of us. Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his hands, jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. What happened to you? He said finally. Not a question. An accusation wrapped in grief. You did, Celine replied. Same answer as before. Same truth. You broke me, and I built myself into something that couldn't be broken again. Don't ask me to apologize for surviving. She turned to her commanders. We're done here. Prepare the forces to move into occupied Shadowfang territory. Set up supply lines, medical stations, schools for the young. Show them what the new order looks like. To KL, she said, "You have 3 days to decide. Join us or stand aside. But if you stand against us, I will bury you. And I won't lose sleep over it." She walked out without waiting for a response. Her people followed. Behind her, in that grain storage building that smelled like dust and old decisions, Kael Shadowfang sat in silence and felt the full weight of what he'd unleashed. Bu'ats our sound. That night, alone in her tent, Celine let the mask slip. She sat on the floor, back against a storage chest, hands shaking with exhaustion she couldn't show her people. The moonfire in her blood hummed constantly now, never quite settling, always ready to erupt. It was getting harder to control. The old woman had warned her about this. The power wants to consume you. Celine closed her eyes and reached for the meditation techniques she'd learned. Breathe in. Count to 4. Breathe out. Find the stillness beneath the storm. But the stillness was getting harder to find. Every time she tapped into the full extent of her abilities, every time she let the moonfire burn through her, it left marks. Not visible ones. Marks on her soul, on whatever part of her was still the girl who'd believed in true mates and fairy tale endings. That girl was dying, maybe already dead, and Celine wasn't sure she mourned her. A sound outside her tent, footsteps, careful and deliberate. Celine's hand went to the blade at her hip, moonfire sparking to life in her other palm. "It's just me," Raven's voice called softly. "Can I come in?" Celine let the fire die. "Enter." Raven ducked through the tent flap, carrying 2 tin cups that steamed in the cold air. She handed one to Celine without ceremony. Tea. The bitter kind that actually helped instead of the sweet stuff that just tasted good. Celine took it, let the warmth seep into her hands. "Thanks." Raven settled across from her, cross-legged, scarred face, thoughtful in the lamplight. That was brutal today. The War Council. It was necessary. Necessary and brutal aren't mutually exclusive. Raven sipped her tea. "You meant what you said. About burning down the system, every word." "Good." Raven's expression was fierce. "Because I've lived under 3 different packs and every one of them ground wolves into dust for the crime of being weak or different or inconvenient. Someone needs to tear it all down. Might as well be you." Celine looked at her commander, this scarred wolf who'd survived horrors Celine could only imagine. "Why do you follow me?" "Really? Is it just the power?" "The power helps," Raven admitted. "Can't lie about that. Moonfire makes you hard to kill and harder to ignore. But that's not why I stay." She met Celine's eyes. "I stay because you asked me my opinion. First week I joined, you asked what I thought about patrol routes. No alpha had ever done that. They just gave orders and expected obedience. You asked. Like my thoughts mattered. Like I was a person instead of a weapon." Celine's throat tightened. "You are a person. You all are. We know. That's the point." Raven finished her tea, set the cup aside. "The others are scared, though. Thought you should know." "Of what?" "Of you." Raven's voice was gentle but honest. "You're changing, Celine, getting colder, harder. The moonfire is burning brighter every time you use it. Some of the younger wolves are starting to whisper that you're becoming what the old moonborn rulers were. Powerful but distant. More force of nature than wolf." The words hit like ice water. Celine's hands clenched around her cup. "I'm doing what needs to be done." "I know. Doesn't mean it's not costing you." Raven leaned forward. "I've seen wolves consumed by power, watched them turn into monsters who couldn't remember why they started fighting in the first place. You're better than that. But you have to choose to stay better, every day. It doesn't happen automatically. How do I do that?" The question came out raw. "How do I be strong enough to change the world but not lose myself in the process?" Raven smiled, sad and knowing. "You keep people around who'll call you on your shit. You listen when they do, and you remember that power is a tool, not an identity. You're not the moonfire, Celine. You're the woman who wields it. Don't let yourself forget the difference." She stood, stretched. "I'll leave you to your brooding now. Just wanted to make sure you knew you're not alone in this, even when it feels like you are." After Raven left, Celine sat in the quiet and felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. She'd been so focused on being strong, on never showing weakness, that she'd forgotten she didn't have to carry everything alone. The old Celine had needed Kael, had defined herself through their bond, through being his mate in Luna. That dependency had made her vulnerable. But independence didn't have to mean isolation. She could be strong and still trust her people, could lead without becoming the tyrant her enemies accused her of being. It was a narrow path, but she'd walked narrower ones. Celine finished her tea and let herself rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, she could just be tired. See. Kael showed up at her tent 2 days later. Celine was reviewing supply reports when the guards announced him. She considered refusing the meeting, but curiosity won out. What could he possibly want that required a private audience? Send him in. Kael entered alone. No guards, no advisors. Just the Alpha King in plain clothes, looking more like a soldier than royalty. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands open and empty. The gesture of a man who knew he was walking into enemy territory. Celine set down her reports. You have 1 day left to decide. Is this your answer? No? Kael's voice was rough. This is a request. For a conversation. Off the record. We don't have off the record. Everything between us is political now. I know. His jaw tightened. I'm asking anyway. Celine studied him, looking for manipulation, for strategy, for whatever angle he was working, but all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked like genuine desperation. Against her better judgment, she nodded. 10 minutes. Talk. Kael exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thank you. He paused, seemed to gather himself. I need to explain something about the rejection. Don't. Celine's voice went flat. I don't want your excuses. It's not an excuse. It's the truth. And you deserve to know it. I deserve a lot of things I didn't get. Hearing your reasons isn't one of them. The elders manipulated me. Kael pushed forward despite her resistance. They told me your bloodline was corrupted, that you carried a genetic weakness that would destroy any children we had, that keeping you as Luna would doom the entire pack to extinction within a generation. Celine's hands clenched. So you believed them? I had tests done. Kael's voice cracked. Medical examinations, genetic analysis, everything. And the results came back confirming their claims. I thought I was protecting you, protecting our future children from a slow death. I thought rejection was kinder than letting you bond with me completely, only to watch our offspring die. The moonfire sparked to life in Celine's palms, silver flames dancing with her rage. You thought killing our bond was kindness? You thought humiliating me in front of the entire pack was protection? I thought it was the only option. Kael took a step forward, heedless of the fire. I was wrong. The tests were falsified. The elders forged everything because they sensed what you were. They knew you carried moonborn blood, and they were terrified of what would happen when it awakened. So they lied. And I believed them because I was a coward who trusted corrupt advisors more than his own instincts. Celine stared at him. The fire in her hands burned hotter, moonlight bright, responding to emotions she couldn't quite name. Part of her wanted to call him a liar, to reject this explanation like he'd rejected her, turn it into a weapon, and drive it through his heart. But another part, the part that had loved him once, recognized truth when she heard it. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. What do you gain? Nothing. Kael's voice was hollow. You'll never forgive me. I know that. The bond is severed permanently. There's no going back. But you asked what I want back in that war council. And what I want is for you to know that destroying us destroyed me too. That I've regretted it every moment since. That if I could undo it, take back every word, I would do it without hesitation. He met her eyes, and the grief there was an ocean. You said I made you into this. And you're right. I broke the woman I loved and created a queen I can barely recognize. That's on me. All of it. I just needed you to know that I see it. I own it. And I will spend whatever time I have left trying to deserve even a fraction of the mercy you showed by saving Shadowfang. The moonfire flickered and died. Celine's hands fell to her sides. She felt hollowed out suddenly, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion. You want absolution, she said quietly. I can't give you that. I know. You want me to tell you it's okay, that I understand, that we can move past this. I can't give you that either. I know. So what do you want, Kael? Really? What are you doing here? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want you to survive this. Whatever you're building, whatever war you're fighting, I want you to come through it without losing who you are. Because I can see it happening. The way the moonfire burns brighter every time you use it. The way you look at people like they're chess pieces instead of wolves. You're turning into something terrifying, and I'm afraid that when the dust settles, there won't be anything left of the woman who taught the pack children to read, who stayed up all night caring for sick wolves, who believed kindness was strength. Celine's breath caught. She'd forgotten that version of herself, had buried her so deep that hearing about her now felt like learning about a stranger. That woman died when you rejected her. No, Kael said firmly. She's still there. I saw her when you saved those survivors, when you offered the enemy Alpha's branding instead of death, when you told your people to set up schools and hospitals. She's still fighting to exist underneath all that power and rage. Don't let her die completely. Please. The please broke something in Celine's chest. Not the bond. That was gone forever. But some small wall she'd built to keep him out, to keep everyone out, cracked just enough to let a sliver of doubt through. Was she becoming a monster? Was the power consuming her the way the old woman had warned? She'd told herself she was different, that she could wield moonfire without being corrupted by it. But what if she was wrong? What if Raven and Kael were both seeing something she couldn't? Your 10 minutes are up, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Give me your answer tomorrow. Join the new order or step aside. Those are still the only options. Kael nodded slowly. He turned to leave, then paused at the tent flap. For what it's worth, he said without looking back, you're a better ruler than I ever was. Shadowfang is lucky you came back, even if it's not for me. He left. Celine stood alone in the quiet, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like snow. The next morning, Kael made his announcement. The entire combined force, Celine's army and what remained of Shadowfang's military, gathered in the main square of the war camp. Thousands of wolves, all watching as the Alpha King climbed onto a platform where everyone could see him. Celine stood to the side with her commanders, arms crossed, face impassive. She had no idea what he'd decided, hoped he'd choose wisdom over pride. But wolves were unpredictable, and wounded pride made them stupider. Kael's voice carried across the crowd, strong despite everything. 4 months ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I rejected my true mate because I believed lies told by corrupt advisors. I chose politics over truth, power over bond. And in doing so, I brought us to the edge of destruction. The crowd stirred. This wasn't the speech anyone expected. Celine Moonborn saved Shadowfang, saved all of us. Not because she owed us anything, not because we deserved it, but because she's better than we are, better than I am. She saw innocent wolves suffering and chose to act, even though every one of them would have watched her die without lifting a paw. He paused, let that sink in. She's offering us a chance to be part of something new, something better than the broken system that led to this war. And I'm taking it. As of today, I'm stepping down from absolute rule of Shadowfang. Governance will be restructured into a council system with representatives from all levels of the pack. Merit-based leadership. Equal voice for every wolf. The crowd exploded, some with approval, others with anger. Traditionalists shouting that this was betrayal, that alphas didn't bow to anyone. Progressives cheering for change. The noise built into chaos. Kael raised his hand for silence. It took several minutes, but eventually the crowd settled. I'm not bowing, he said firmly. I'm choosing. There's a difference. True strength isn't holding on to power when you're not fit to wield it. True strength is recognizing when someone else can do better and stepping aside. Celine Moonborn is that someone, and I will support her vision because it's the only path forward that doesn't end in ashes. He looked directly at Celine then. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. I can't undo what I did to you. Can't take back the rejection or the pain it caused. But I can make sure it meant something. Can make sure your suffering led to real change instead of just more of the same. That's all I can offer, and I'm offering it freely. Kael descended the platform. Around him, wolves argued and debated and processed what they'd just heard. But he walked straight to Celine, stopped in front of her, and did something no one had ever seen an Alpha King do. He knelt. The crowd went silent. Every eye locked on them. Celine stared down at Kael, at this man who'd destroyed her, who was now offering himself and his kingdom like they were hers to command. The old Celine would have helped him up, would have said something gracious about partnership and unity, but the old Celine was dead. This Celine understood power, understood that symbols mattered, that this moment would define everything that came after. She let him kneel, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then she spoke, voice carrying across the square. You kneel today, but tomorrow you stand beside me. Not above, not below. Beside. As equals building something neither of us could create alone. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Kael's head came up. Something like hope flickered in his eyes. I take it. Then rise, Alpha King. We have work to do. He stood. Around them, the crowd howled. Approval, disapproval, shock, all mixed together in a cacophony that sounded like the beginning of something. Or maybe the end. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Celine turned to her commanders. Integrate the forces, start the restructuring, set up the councils. Move fast, but move smart. We're writing the blueprint for every pack that comes after. Make it count. They dispersed, efficient and focused. Celine started to follow, but Kael's voice stopped her. Celine. She turned back. He looked like he wanted to say something profound, something that would bridge the chasm between them. But in the end, he just said, Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she replied. This is just the beginning. 3 weeks passed in a blur of reorganization and resistance. The integration went smoother than expected in some areas, worse in others. Civilian wolves adapted quickly to the new council system, electing representatives, voicing opinions they'd never been allowed to express before. But the warrior class struggled. Tradition ran deep in their blood. The idea of taking orders from wolves who'd been beneath them last month sat like poison in their guts. Celine dealt with dissent the same way she dealt with everything, swiftly and without mercy when necessary, fairly when possible. A group of traditionalist warriors tried to stage a coup on the second week. They cornered one of her civilian counselors in an alley, planning to make an example. Celine found them before they could. The moonfire she used was controlled but terrifying, burning through their resistance without touching their flesh. She left them alive but marked silver brands on their arms that identified them as oath breakers. The message was clear: challenge the new order and face consequences. But consequences weren't death if you could learn. 2 of those warriors came to her a week later and asked to join her personal guard. Said they'd never seen power restrained like that, never imagined strength could include mercy. She accepted them, put them through brutal retraining, and watched them become her fiercest defenders. That was the pattern. Resistance, confrontation, transformation. Slowly, painfully, the new system took root. Kael kept his word. He attended councils as one voice among many, not the final authority. When he disagreed with decisions, he stated his case and accepted when he was outvoted. It clearly cost him. Celine could see the strain in how he held himself, the effort it took to unlearn a lifetime of absolute power. But he did it, and that meant something. They worked together now. Not friends, not mates, but reluctant allies building something bigger than their shared history. It was awkward and uncomfortable and occasionally hostile, but it worked. On the 21st day of the new order, scouts brought news that changed everything. Celine was in a strategy meeting when they arrived, mud-splattered and exhausted. The lead scout was a young male named River, quick and smart, one of her best. "My queen," he gasped. "We've got movement from the south, multiple packs, thousands of wolves, moving north in coordinated formation." "Raiders?" Frost asked sharply. "Worse." River's face was pale. "It's a coalition. 7 packs from the southern kingdoms, all marching under one banner. They're calling it a holy war, coming to cleanse the north of your corruption." The room went silent. Celine felt ice settle in her stomach. 7 packs. That was nearly 10,000 wolves if they were all at full strength, more than double what they'd faced in the siege. "How long until they reach our borders?" she asked calmly. 5 days. Maybe 4 if they push hard. Kael swore. "We're not ready. The restructuring is half finished, the forces are still integrating. We don't have the cohesion to face that kind of assault." "Then we make cohesion happen," Raven said. "We've got 4 days. Use them." "Against 10,000 wolves?" Garrett shook his head. "We'd need twice our current numbers to have a chance. Even with Moonfire, even with better organization, the math doesn't work. Celine closed her eyes, reached for the calm center the old woman had taught her to find. But the calm was harder to reach now. The moonfire in her blood hummed louder, eager, wanting to burn, wanting to protect. And underneath that, something older stirred. The ancient power of the moonborn line, the force that had commanded empires. She could use it, could unleash everything, become the weapon her enemies feared. But Raven's warning echoed in her mind. You're becoming what the old moonborn rulers were, more force of nature than wolf. If she went full monster to win this war, would there be anything left of her when it ended? We evacuate the civilians, Celine said, opening her eyes. Get them to the northern safe zones. Every warrior, every able-bodied wolf stays to fight. We meet them on ground of our choosing, use terrain to offset their numbers. That's still suicide, Garrett said flatly. Maybe. Celine looked around the table. Or maybe it's a statement that we'd rather die free than live under kingdoms that call progress corruption, that some things are worth bleeding for. She stood, moonfire already sparking to life in her palms. Send messengers to every pack within 3 days' travel. Tell them what's coming, tell them we're standing against it, and tell them if they want to join us, if they want to be part of the new order, this is their chance to prove it. You think anyone will come? Frost asked quietly. I think wolves are tired of being ground into dust by systems that don't care about them. Celine's eyes blazed silver. I think they're ready for something different, and I think they'll fight for it if someone gives them the chance. What if you're wrong? Then we die. But we die trying. That's more than most wolves get. She walked to the tent entrance, paused, looked back at her people. All of them scared but determined, loyal but uncertain, following her into a war they might not survive. 4 days, she said. Make them count. The preparations were brutal. Every warrior drilled from dawn until collapse. Celine pushed herself hardest of all, training with her forces, showing them techniques the old woman had taught her. How to fight in coordinated units. How to use moonfire if they could access even a fraction of their buried moonborn heritage. How to turn fear into fuel instead of letting it paralyze. Kael worked alongside her. No throne to retreat to now, just another soldier preparing to bleed. They didn't speak much, but they developed a rhythm. He knew tactics and terrain. She knew ancient war strategies from the moonborn archives the old woman had made her memorize. Together they crafted a defense that might give them a chance. On the second day, the first response to her messengers arrived. A small pack from the eastern mountains. 30 wolves total, led by an old female alpha named Stone. She met with Celine in private, eyes hard and assessing. We heard what you're building, Stone said. Heard you're tearing down the old hierarchies, making space for wolves like us who've been pushed to the margins. That true? Every word. And you're facing 7 southern packs alone, unless others join us. Celine met her gaze steadily. I won't lie to you. The odds are terrible. You might die if you fight with us. But if we win, if we survive this, you'll have a place in what we build, a real place, not the scraps the old system offered. Stone was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, all teeth. We're in. My pack's been waiting a century for someone to challenge the status quo. Might as well be now. 30 more wolves, better than nothing. On the third day, 2 more packs arrived. Then a dozen rogues who'd heard rumors and wanted to see if the moonborn queen was real. By the 4th morning, Celine's forces had swelled by nearly 400. Not enough to match the south, but enough to matter. She stood on a ridge overlooking the assembled army and felt something shift in her chest. These wolves weren't following her out of compulsion or ancient magic. They were choosing this, choosing her vision of something better. That faith was heavier than any crown. Kael joined her on the ridge. Together they watched the sun rise over an army that shouldn't exist, that had no business standing against the force coming for them. Do you think we can win? He asked quietly. Celine considered lying, offering false hope, but she'd built this new order on truth, and she wouldn't abandon that now. I think we can make them pay for every inch of ground, make them bleed so badly they'll think twice before trying this again. Whether that's victory or just expensive defeat, she shrugged. We'll find out tomorrow. Kael nodded. His hand moved like he might reach for hers, then stopped. The bond was gone. That casual intimacy they'd once shared was dead. But something else existed now, something harder and more complicated. Respect, maybe. Or just the understanding between two people who'd destroyed each other and somehow ended up on the same side of an impossible war. Celine, he said, if we don't survive this, we will. But if we don't? His voice was firm. I want you to know that working with you these past weeks, watching you build something real out of the ashes, it's been an honor. You're everything a ruler should be, everything I failed to be. Don't, Celine said. Her throat was tight. Don't make this a goodbye. We're walking out of this, both of us, and we're going to finish what we started. Kael smiled, sad and knowing. As you command, my queen. He left her alone on the ridge. Below, the army continued preparations. Wolves, sharpening blades, checking armor, saying prayers or curses, or whatever helped them face the coming dawn. Tomorrow they'd meet the Southern Coalition on a field the old woman had shown Celine in a vision. A valley where the Moonborn had won their last great victory before the Empire fell. History coming full circle. One way or another. Celine closed her eyes and reached deep into her power. The moonfire responded instantly, eager and hungry. It wanted to burn, wanted to consume everything in silver flames until nothing remained but her will made manifest. The temptation to let go, to become pure power, was nearly overwhelming. But she thought about Raven's warning, about Kael's concern, about all the wolves who'd chosen to follow her precisely because she wasn't just another tyrant wielding power for its own sake. I am not the fire, she whispered to herself. I am the one who wields it. I am Celine Moonborn, and I choose who I become. The power settled, still there, still ready, but no longer trying to consume her. A tool, not an identity. The difference was everything. She opened her eyes as full dark fell. Tomorrow would bring blood and fire and pain, but tonight she was still herself. Still the woman who'd survived rejection and rebuilt herself into something stronger. Still the queen who believed wolves deserved better than what they'd been given. Whatever happened in that valley, she'd face it as herself. Not as a monster, not as a weapon, as Celine. And that would have to be enough. The Southern Coalition arrived at dawn like a plague. Celine stood on the northern ridge overlooking the valley, watching 10,000 wolves pour across the southern entrance in perfect formation. 7 pack banners flew above them, colors bright against the gray morning sky. At their center, a massive black banner with a silver crown torn in half. The symbol was clear. They'd come to destroy her before the Moonborn Empire could rise again. The wind carried their scent, aggression and certainty. They thought this would be easy. A quick slaughter to remind the North that progress was heresy and change was treason. They had numbers. They had unity. They had every tactical advantage except one. They didn't know what she was willing to become to win. Celine turned to her assembled commanders. Kael stood to her right, armor buckled tight, face carved from stone. Raven to her left, weapons already drawn. Frost, the general, Garrett, Stone, from the mountain pack, all of them looking at her like she held answers instead of just increasingly desperate plans. They're positioning for a frontal assault, Frost observed. Classic overwhelming force strategy. They expect us to break on the first charge. Then we don't give them a first charge, Celine said. We split into 3 groups. Raven takes the eastern flank, uses the forest cover for hit-and-run attacks. Stone, you take the west, same strategy. Make them divide their attention. And the center? Kael asked. We hold it. Celine's eyes blazed silver. You, me, and every wolf who can channel moonfire. We make them come through hell to reach us. That's still 3,000 wolves against our center line, the general said carefully. Even with moonfire, those odds... I know the math. Celine's voice went cold. I also know we don't have better options. We make them pay for every inch. We make this victory so expensive they'll never try it again. That's all we can do. She descended from the ridge, her army falling in behind her. 400 wolves against 10,000. Suicide by any reasonable measure. But nothing about the past 4 months had been reasonable. She'd died in the snow and been reborn in moonfire, had torn down systems that stood for millennia, had built something new from the ashes of her own destruction. Reasonable had nothing to do with it anymore. They took positions in the valley center. Celine at the front, Kael beside her, concentric rings of warriors spreading out behind. The Southern Coalition saw them and laughed. The sound carried across the field like mockery. A single wolf separated from the southern lines. Massive, scarred, wearing ceremonial armor that marked him as High Alpha. He shifted to human form as he approached, stopping 50 yards away. "I am Magnus Ironwrath," he called out. "High Alpha of the Southern Coalition. I'm here to offer terms." Celine walked forward to meet him, alone. Behind her, Kael tensed but didn't follow. This was her war. Her choice. She stopped 10 yards from Magnus, close enough to see the contempt in his eyes. He looked at her like she was an insult to everything he believed in. A female. A rogue. A pretender claiming royal blood that should have died with the old empire. "Your terms," she said flatly. "Surrender." Magnus's smile was all teeth. "Dissolve your little rebellion. Return these territories to traditional Alpha rule. Do that, and I'll let most of your followers live. Exile instead of execution. Generous, considering the heresy you've preached. And me? You die." Magnus shrugged. Publicly, slowly, as an example of what happens to those who challenge the natural order. But your death purchases mercy for the wolves you've led astray. That's the deal. Celine studied him, saw the certainty in his stance, the absolute conviction that his way was right, that tradition trumped progress, that strength meant domination instead of protection. He was everything she'd spent 4 months fighting against, everything that had to end for wolves to evolve beyond cycles of violence and oppression. "Here's my counteroffer," she said. "Turn around. Take your armies home. Live to see your grandchildren grow up. Because if you start this fight, I promise you don't walk away from it." Magnus laughed, genuine amusement lighting his scarred face. "You have 400 wolves. I have 10,000. You're outnumbered 25-1. What exactly do you think you can do?" Celine let the moonfire rise. Silver flames erupted around her, cold and beautiful and terrifying. They burned without heat but promised destruction all the same. Magnus's laughter died. His eyes widened as he recognized what he was seeing. Ancient power, the kind that hadn't walked the earth in centuries. "I am Celine Moonborn," she said, and let her voice carry the weight of empires. "Last daughter of the royal line. I carry the power that built civilizations and burned them to ash. You came here to crush a rebellion. What you found was the return of everything your ancestors feared." She took a step forward. Magnus took a step back. "So here's what happens next. You can retreat and tell your kingdoms that the old ways are dying, that wolves who want to join the new order are welcome, and those who resist will be buried. Or you can attack, and I turn this valley into a graveyard that historians will study for the next 1,000 years. Your choice. Make it fast." Magnus stared at her for a long moment. She saw calculation in his eyes, weighing risks, measuring his own mortality against his convictions. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually choose wisdom. Then his expression hardened. "We don't negotiate with abominations," he said. He turned and walked back to his lines. Celine watched him go, feeling something cold settle in her chest. She'd given them a chance. They'd chosen violence. What came next was on them. She returned to her position. Kael met her eyes, a question in his gaze. "They're attacking," she said simply. "Then we fight." Kael drew his blade. "For what it's worth, I'm honored to die beside you. We're not dying today." Celine raised her hand, moonfire dancing along her fingers. "We're teaching them why the Moonborn were feared." The Southern Coalition charged, 10,000 wolves surging forward like an avalanche. The ground shook with their approach. War cries echoed across the valley. This was the moment that should have broken Celine's forces, should have sent them fleeing or crying for mercy. Instead, they held. Celine unleashed the moonfire. Silver flames erupted in a wall across the valley floor, burning cold and bright. Wolves hit it and screamed, not dying but paralyzed, nerves locked by ancient magic. But they were too many. They pushed through, accepting casualties, driven by numbers and momentum. The lines collided. Celine fought like something that had never been fully mortal. Moonfire in one hand, blade in the other, she carved through enemies with brutal efficiency. Wolves lunged and died. Claws raked and found only flame. She was everywhere at once, a silver shadow that killed and moved and killed again. Beside her, Kael fought with the desperate skill of a man who had everything to atone for. His blade sang. His wolf's strength drove enemies back. They moved in unconscious synchronization, protecting each other's blind spots, functioning as a unit despite the broken bond between them. Around them, Celine's forces held longer than they had any right to. The training showed. The new unity showed. Wolves who'd been rogues and outcasts 3 weeks ago now fought like a pack that had bled together for years. They died. Too many of them died. But they took southern wolves with them, and they never broke formation. Raven's forces hit the eastern flank. Stone hammered the west. The Southern Coalition's perfect formation began to fragment, pulled in multiple directions. Not enough to turn the tide, but enough to create chaos. Enough to make Magnus's easy victory start looking expensive. Celine felt the moonfire burning hotter in her blood, demanding more, wanting to erupt in full devastating power and consume everything on this field, friend and enemy alike. The temptation was overwhelming. She could end this, right now, unleash everything and reduce this valley to ash. But that would make her the monster they accused her of being, would prove that the Moonborn were tyrants who'd rather burn the world than share it. And every wolf who'd chosen to follow her, who'd believed in the vision of something better, would die knowing their queen had become exactly what she'd sworn to fight against. So Celine held back, used only what power she needed, maintained control even as the cost of that control was measured in her people's blood. The battle raged for hours. Celine lost track of time, lost in the rhythm of violence. Block, strike, burn, move. Block, strike, burn, move. Bodies piled around her, her own forces thinning, but still they held, still they fought. Then the horn sounded from the southern lines. 3 sharp blasts. Retreat. Magnus was pulling back his forces, reforming for another push. Celine's army didn't pursue. They couldn't. Half of them were wounded. A quarter were dead. They stood in blood-soaked grass, gasping, barely able to hold weapons. But they'd held. Against impossible odds, they'd held. Kael limped to her side, bleeding from a dozen wounds. We can't survive another charge like that. I know. Celine's hands shook with exhaustion. The moonfire had drained her more than she'd expected. Holding back took more effort than unleashing. How many did we lose? 137 dead. Another 52 wounded to fight. The general's voice was hollow. One more push and we break. Then we make sure there isn't one more push. Celine forced herself upright, despite every muscle screaming. I'm going to end this. How? Raven demanded. We've bled them, but they still outnumber us 10-1. Unless you're planning to... I'm challenging Magnus to single combat. Celine cut her off. Alpha to alpha. Winner takes the field. It's the old way. He'll have to accept or look weak in front of his coalition. That's suicide, Kael said flatly. He's twice your size and has 50 years of combat experience. Then I die. Celine met his eyes. But if I win, this ends without losing any more of our people. That's worth the risk. Before anyone could argue further, she walked toward the neutral ground between the armies. Behind her, her people called out, begging her to reconsider. She ignored them. This was her war, her responsibility, her choice. Magnus saw her coming and smiled. He walked out to meet her, confident and relaxed. This was what he'd wanted all along, the chance to crush the Moonborn pretender personally. They met in the center of the corpse-strewn field. Single combat, Celine said. You and me. Winner takes the valley, and the war ends here. Magnus laughed. You want to die that badly? Fine. I accept. No moonfire, though. Claws and teeth only. Let's see if your royal blood means anything without your tricks. Celine hesitated. Without moonfire, she was just a wolf. Young, smaller, less experienced. Magnus would tear her apart. But if she refused now, she'd look like a coward. And her people needed her to be brave more than they needed her to be smart. Agreed, she said, and felt the moonfire recede, the power coiling back into her blood. Just wolves. Traditional combat. They shifted simultaneously. Wolf forms erupting in ripples of bone and fur. Magnus was massive in his animal body, midnight black with scars crossing his hide like battle honors. Celine was silver white, smaller but faster. They circled each other, looking for openings. Magnus struck first. A feint to her left, then a savage lunge for her throat. Celine barely dodged, felt his teeth snap shut on empty air where her neck had been. She twisted, raked claws across his shoulder, drew first blood. But it was a shallow wound. Magnus shook it off and came at her again. This time his jaws closed on her foreleg. Pain exploded through Celine's body. She felt bone crack, tried to pull free, but Magnus's grip was iron. He shook her like prey, trying to break her neck. Celine did the only thing she could. She went for his eyes. Her free paw lashed out, claws extended, aiming for the soft tissue. Magnus jerked back on instinct, releasing her leg to protect his face. Celine hit the ground hard, legs screaming agony, but she was free. She scrambled back, limping, trying to put distance between them. Magnus stalked forward. He knew he'd won. It was just a matter of time now. Celine couldn't run on that leg, couldn't dodge effectively. She was prey, and they both knew it. "This is what happens to pretenders," Magnus growled. "This is what happens to wolves who forget their place." He lunged. Celine tried to move, but her leg buckled. Magnus's jaws closed around her throat, not biting down yet, just holding her, asserting dominance, making it clear who was stronger. In that moment, Celine realized the truth she'd been denying for weeks. Holding back wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of becoming the monster, fear of losing herself to power. But monsters didn't care about protecting the weak. Monsters didn't build schools and hospitals. Monsters didn't give enemies the chance to surrender. She'd been so afraid of becoming a tyrant that she'd forgotten the difference between using power and being consumed by it. The moonfire exploded. Silver flames erupted from Celine's body, cold and devastating. Magnus yelped and released her, stumbling back, fur smoking where the fire had touched him. Celine rose, leg already healing, moonfire knitting bone and flesh back together. The power roared through her, limitless and furious, demanding release. "You said no moonfire," Magnus snarled. "You gave your word." I lied. Celine's voice was layered with ancient authority. "You came here to destroy progress, to crush wolves who dared dream of something better. Did you really think I'd fight fair?" The moonfire intensified, spreading across the battlefield in waves. Wolves on both sides backed away, terrified of being caught in its path. Celine walked toward Magnus, limping less with each step, her body repairing itself through sheer force of will and ancient magic. "You wanted to see what moonborn power could do," she said. "Let me show you." She unleashed everything. The moonfire didn't just burn, it transformed. Silver flames wrapped around Magnus, not killing, but changing, rewriting something fundamental in his blood. He screamed, a sound of agony and confusion. When the flames receded, he collapsed, gasping, his eyes no longer his own. They glowed faint silver, controlled, commanded. Around the battlefield, Celine reached for the buried moonborn heritage in every wolf present. That ancient bloodline they all carried, diluted by generations but never truly gone. She called to it, commanded it, and it answered. Thousands of wolves dropped to their knees simultaneously. Southern coalition and northern rebels alike, all feeling the weight of royal authority pressing down on their souls. This was the power the Alphas had feared. The ability to command any wolf through blood right alone, to bend entire armies to her will without a single blade drawn. Celine stood in the center of them all, moonfire blazing like wings, and understood what she'd become. Not a queen, not a ruler, a force. Something beyond wolf, beyond mortal, beyond anything that should walk the earth. The old woman's warning echoed in her mind. The power wants to consume you. You must be stronger. But what if being stronger meant letting it consume her? What if the only way to save her people was to become the weapon they needed instead of the leader they deserved? From the northern lines, Kael's voice cut through the haze. "Celine, stop! You're losing yourself!" She turned toward him. He stood at the edge of her power's radius, one of the few wolves still standing, resisting through sheer force of will and the remnants of their broken bond. His face showed horror and recognition. He was watching her become exactly what he'd feared. What everyone had feared. "They need to submit," Celine heard herself say. "It's the only way to ensure peace." "This isn't peace." Kael took a step closer, fighting the pressure trying to drive him to his knees. "This is domination. This is what the old Moonborn did wrong. What destroyed them? You're better than this." "Am I?" The words came out hollow. "Or have I just been pretending? Maybe this is what I always was, what I was always meant to become." "No." Another voice. Raven, also still standing, bleeding from a dozen wounds but refusing to bow. "You're Celine." The woman who saved civilians instead of taking revenge. Who gave enemies mercy when you could have given death. Who built councils instead of thrones. That's who you are. Not this. The moonfire flickered, uncertainty cutting through the absolute control. Celine felt the power waver, felt the wolves under her command start to stir. If she let go now, if she released them, the battle would restart. More would die. The war would continue. But if she held on, if she kept them all under her control through blood right and ancient magic, she'd become the tyrant. Would rule through fear and compulsion. Would prove that the Moonborn line had always been about domination, that progress was just another word for a different kind of slavery. She stood at the fulcrum between two futures, two versions of herself, the woman or the weapon. Then a third voice cut through everything, cold and familiar and wrong. "Well done, daughter!" The old woman from the cave stepped out of nowhere, materializing like she'd always been there. "You finally embraced your true nature." Celine spun toward her. Something was different about the woman. The warmth that had existed during training, the careful teaching, was gone. In its place was hunger, ambition, the look of someone who'd finally gotten exactly what they wanted. "What did you call me?" Celine said slowly. "Daughter." The woman smiled. "Did you think it coincidence that I found you in the snow? That I just happened to be waiting in the one cave you'd reach after falling? I've been watching you since birth, Celine, waiting for the rejection that would break the seal, waiting for desperation to make you strong enough to channel the full Moonborn power. You're lying. I'm your mother's mother's mother, the last true Moonborn before you. I faked my death during the purge, hid in the Frostlands, and waited. Generations. Watching my descendants live and die without power, diluting the bloodline just enough that the alphas stopped hunting us. And then you were born. The first in 5 generations born with enough concentrated blood to potentially wake the full power. So I made sure you'd be pushed to the breaking point, made sure Kael would reject you." The words hit like physical blows. Celine's control wavered further. The moonfire flickered. "The elders," she whispered. "The forged medical tests. That was you. I have agents everywhere." The old woman's smile widened. "Morrigan has owed me favors for decades. It was simple to arrange. Break the bond, drive you into the wilderness, force the awakening. And here we are. You've finally claimed your birthright, finally become what you were meant to be. A weapon." Kael's voice was hoarse. "You turned her into a weapon, into a queen." The old woman's eyes blazed, into the force that will restore the Moonborn Empire. No more pretending to care about councils and equality. No more weakness disguised as mercy. "You'll rule, Celine, with absolute power, as is your right." Celine stared at this woman who'd saved her life and trained her and apparently orchestrated her entire destruction. Felt the moonfire burning in her blood, demanding release, wanting to consume everything. Felt the thousands of wolves still under her command, bent to her will, waiting for orders. She could do it. Could take the power fully. Become the empress this woman wanted. Rule through blood right and ancient magic and never risk being rejected or cast aside or hurt again. Could make sure no wolf ever suffered the way she had by controlling them all completely. It would be easy. The power was already there. Already hers. All she had to do was stop fighting it. Celine looked at Kael, at Raven, at her people, both those kneeling against their will and those still resisting. Saw the fear in their eyes. Not fear of the enemy, fear of her, of what she was becoming. Then she looked at the old woman who'd shaped her entire life from the shadows, who'd used her pain, her rejection, her desperation as tools to forge a weapon, who saw her as nothing more than a vessel for dead ambitions. Something inside Celine finally broke. Not the way the bond had broken, not painful, liberating. She'd spent 4 months trying to be strong enough for everyone, strong enough to lead, strong enough to change the world, strong enough to prove she wasn't the weak Luna they'd called her. But maybe strength wasn't about control. Maybe it was about choosing who you wanted to be, even when power offered easier paths. Celine released the moonfire. All of it. The command over the wolves. The burning power in her blood. The ancient magic that promised absolute control. She let it drain away, pulled it back into the depths where it slept, and stood on the battlefield as just herself. Just Celine. exhausted and wounded and terrified, but free. The wolves under her command gasped as the pressure released. They struggled to their feet, confused and shaken. Magnus shook his head like clearing water from his ears, the silver glow fading from his eyes. The old woman's expression went from triumph to fury in an instant. "What are you doing? Take back the power. Command them." "No." Celine's voice was quiet but absolute. "I won't be your weapon, won't be the next tyrant. If wolves are going to follow me, it'll be by choice, not compulsion. You're throwing away everything." The old woman's hands clenched. "Centuries of planning, the restoration of our line, our rightful place." "Your place," Celine corrected. "Your ambitions, your empire. I never wanted to rule the world. I just wanted to stop being crushed by it." She turned to face Magnus and the assembled Southern Coalition. They stared at her like she was insane. She'd just given up absolute power, had released them when she could have commanded them to bow forever. "I'm done fighting," Celine said, her voice carried across the silent battlefield. "You came here to stop the Moonborn from rising again. Congratulations. I'm not rising, I'm not claiming empire or demanding submission. I'm just a wolf who wants to build something better than what we have. And I'm offering you the same choice I offer everyone. Join that vision willingly or walk away. But this war ends now. I won't spend another drop of my people's blood on it." Magnus shifted to human form, naked and confused and bleeding. "You're surrendering?" "I'm refusing to play your game." Celine met his eyes. "You wanted me to be the monster, wanted to prove that progress was just tyranny with a different name. I won't give you that. So either kill me now while I stand here weaponless, or accept that maybe, just maybe, change doesn't have to mean domination." The silence stretched. 10,000 wolves watching, waiting to see what happened when someone chose principle over power, when someone walked away from easy victory because the cost was their own soul. Magnus looked at his coalition, at the wolves who'd marched with him expecting easy conquest, and instead found something they didn't have words for. He looked at Celine, standing defenseless, daring him to prove her wrong. Then he did something no one expected. He knelt, not in submission, in respect, the kind one warrior gave another after an honorable fight. "I came here believing you were a threat to everything we hold sacred," he said. "But what's sacred about a system that grinds wolves into dust? What are we protecting if not our own power and privilege?" He stood slowly. "I don't know if your new order will work, but I do know the old order is breaking us. So, I'll give it a chance. One season. Prove it can work and my pack will join the alliance. Fail and we walk away. That's the best I can offer." One by one, the other Southern Alphas stepped forward, some agreeing, some still hostile but too confused to continue fighting. The coalition fractured, not into enemies but into individuals making individual choices. The war ended not with surrender or victory, but with uncertainty, with questions instead of answers. It wasn't clean, it wasn't satisfying, but it was real. Celine turned back to the old woman. "You wanted an empire. I'm building a community. If you can accept that, you're welcome to stay and help. If not, you're a fool," the woman spat. "You'll die in obscurity, remembered for nothing. You had greatness and you threw it away. Then I'll die free." Celine's voice was steady, instead of living as a slave to power. "I'll take that deal." The old woman stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away, dissolving into shadows like she'd never been there. Celine felt the last connection to her past sever. The training, the power, the destiny that had been forced on her, all of it falling away, leaving just herself. Wounded and exhausted, but finally free to choose her own path. Kael approached slowly. The battlefield was dispersing, both sides retreating to process what had happened. Soon they'd be alone, just two wolves who'd destroyed each other and somehow ended up on the same side of something impossible. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "Or the stupidest. Maybe both." Celine laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "Both. Definitely both." She swayed, suddenly aware of how badly she was wounded, how completely drained. Her leg was healed, but everything else screamed. "I think I need to sit down." Kael caught her as she fell. His arms around her didn't spark the bond. That was gone forever, but they were solid and warm and real. For just a moment, she let herself lean on someone else, Let herself be held without having to be strong or perfect or invincible. What happens now? Kael asked. Celine closed her eyes. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and terrifying and free of destiny's weight. They'd have to build the councils, integrate the packs, prove to Magnus and the others that change could work, fight against centuries of tradition and prejudice and wolves who'd never accept that strength could mean something other than domination. It would be hard, probably impossible. They'd likely fail. But they'd fail as themselves. Not as weapons, not as tyrants, as wolves trying to make the world slightly less terrible than they found it. Now, Celine said, we do the hard part. We prove I was right. She opened her eyes, looked up at Kael. Help me stand. He did. Together, wounded and exhausted and terrified, they walked back to their people. Behind them, the valley was soaked in blood and littered with bodies and marked by a battle that shouldn't have ended the way it did. Ahead, the future waited. Uncertain, dangerous. Theirs to shape. Celine had given up absolute power, had refused the easy path of domination, and now she'd have to live with that choice. Had to prove every single day that mercy wasn't weakness, that restraint wasn't failure, that you could tear down broken systems without becoming the next tyrant. The old woman's words echoed in her mind. You'll die in obscurity, remembered for nothing. Maybe. Probably. But she'd die as herself. And right now, bloodied and broken and free, that was enough. The real war was just beginning. Not the kind fought with claws and moonfire. The kind fought in council chambers and civilian hearts. The kind that took generations instead of hours. The kind with no clear victory, just the daily choice to keep trying. Celine looked at her people, at the wolves who'd followed her here and somehow survived, at Kael, still beside her despite everything, at the uncertain future they'd carved out of impossible odds. Then she took a breath and started walking toward whatever came next. The peace lasted exactly 12 days. Celine stood in the newly constructed council chamber, a converted warehouse that still smelled like grain and old wood, and listened to reports that made her blood run cold. 3 villages burned. 17 wolves dead, another 23 missing, all in territories that had sworn allegiance to the new order. The attacks bore no signature, no pack claimed responsibility, but the pattern was clear. Someone wanted her experiment to fail, wanted to prove that tearing down the old system only created chaos and death. Magnus sat across from her, his scarred face grim. My scouts tracked the raiders to the Blackstone Peaks, abandoned territory. No pack has claimed it in decades. Because nothing lives there, Frost said. The land is cursed, poisoned by old magic from the last Moonborn purge. Then someone's using it as a base, Raven added. Someone who knows we can't track them through dead ground. Kael leaned forward, hands flat on the table. We need to respond, show these territories we can protect them. If we don't, they'll abandon us, Celine finished. Return to the old alphas because at least traditional rule came with traditional protection. She pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling the weight of leadership like physical pressure. How many warriors can we spare for a hunting party? Maybe 50, Garrett said. But that leaves our settlements vulnerable. We're spread too thin as it is. The door to the chamber slammed open. A young scout stumbled in, breathing hard, face pale with terror. My queen, you need to see this. Celine was already moving. She followed the scout outside to where a crowd had gathered in the main square. They parted for her, silent and terrified, revealing what they'd found. A body, or what remained of one, displayed on a wooden post like a warning. The wolf had been tortured before death, skin carved with symbols Celine recognized from her training with the old woman. Ancient marks, moonborn execution signs, and pinned to the corpse's chest was a message written in blood. The false queen bleeds her people for pride. Return to the old ways or watch them all die. Celine's hands clenched. The moonfire sparked to life in her palms, an involuntary response to rage and helplessness. Around her, wolves murmured, fear spreading like disease. This was the 3rd body in 5 days. 3 wolves tortured and displayed as warnings. Someone was hunting her people, and she had no idea who. Kael appeared at her side, voice low. This is organized, professional, not random raiders. I know. Selena forced the moonfire back down, forced herself to think instead of just react. The old woman had walked away from the battlefield, But that didn't mean she'd given up. And she had centuries of contacts, agents everywhere, enough resources to wage a shadow war that would bleed Celine's coalition dry without ever showing a face to strike back against. "We need to evacuate the outer settlements," Raven said. "Pull everyone back to defendable positions." That's exactly what they want. Celine's mind raced through options, all of them terrible. Make us look weak. Prove we can't protect our own territory. If we consolidate, we lose everything we've built. If we don't, we lose people, Kyle countered. I'd rather lose territory than watch more wolves die like this. They're already dying. Frost's voice was quiet but cutting. 14 packs have sent messages asking to withdraw from the Alliance. They're terrified, and we have nothing to tell them except that we're trying our best. Our best isn't enough. The words came from Magnus, standing at the edge of the crowd. The Southern Alpha's expression was unreadable. I agreed to give this one season, but if you can't protect the wolves who trust you, what's the point? The old system was brutal, but at least it was stable. Stable through oppression, Celine shot back, through forcing wolves to accept cruelty because the alternative was worse. Is that really what you want to return to? I want to return to my people alive. Magnus met her eyes. You made promises, big promises about a better world. But right now, all I see is chaos and corpses. So either find whoever's doing this and stop them, or admit you were wrong. He turned and walked away. Half the crowd followed him. The other half stayed, but their expressions held the same question. Can you actually protect us, or are we dying for nothing? Celine stood in that square surrounded by fear and doubt and the smell of blood, and felt the weight of every choice she'd made crushing down on her shoulders. She'd refused absolute power, had chosen the hard path of building something better instead of just dominating through force, and now her people were paying for that choice with their lives. Maybe the old woman had been right. Maybe mercy was just weakness with better marketing. That night she couldn't sleep. Celine sat alone in her quarters, a small room in the same converted warehouse as the council chamber. Spartan. Functional. Nothing like the Luna suite she'd briefly occupied in Shadow Fang's palace. But that felt like another lifetime, another person who'd believed in fairy tales and true mates and happy endings. This person knew better. A knock at the door. Celine's hand went to the blade at her hip before she recognized the scent. Kyle. She considered sending him away, but exhaustion made her reckless. Enter. He came in carrying 2 cups that steamed in the cold air. Tea. The bitter kind Raven had introduced her 2 weeks ago. He handed her one without asking, settled into the chair across from her small desk. You should rest, he said. You've been awake for 3 days straight. I'll rest when my people stop dying. Celine sipped the tea, let the heat anchor her. When whoever's hunting us makes a mistake. What if they don't? Then we burn. She met his eyes. And everyone who trusted me burns with them. At least then they can say I warned them. That I never promised easy. Kale was quiet for a moment. You can't blame yourself for this. Why not? I'm the one who tore down the old order, who promised something better. If I can't deliver that, if all I brought was more death and suffering, you brought hope, Kale interrupted. I've watched wolves who spent their entire lives crushed by hierarchy suddenly believe they mattered. Children who would have been written off as weak, now training in schools where their minds count more than their strength. Rogues finding packs instead of dying alone. That's what you built. Don't let whoever's doing this make you forget that. Hope doesn't stop blades. Celine's voice cracked despite her control. It doesn't bring back the dead. Doesn't comfort the families watching their loved ones displayed like trophies. No, but it's what keeps them fighting instead of surrendering. Kale leaned forward. You asked me once what I wanted, really wanted. And I gave you some speech about wanting you to survive with your soul intact. But the truth is simpler than that. What? I want to matter. Same as you. His storm gray eyes held hers. I spent my whole life being told I mattered because I was strong, because I could dominate, because I was alpha. And then I lost you and realized none of that actually meant anything. Power without purpose is just violence with a crown. He stood, set down his cup. You gave me purpose, Celine. Gave all of us purpose. Something worth bleeding for that isn't just more of the same endless cycle. So when you start doubting whether any of this matters, remember that we're choosing this. All of us. Not because you're controlling us or because we're too weak to resist. Because you showed us something worth choosing. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow you're going to do something reckless. Kale's expression was knowing. I can see it in how you're holding yourself, how you're looking at those reports. You're planning to hunt whoever's behind this alone. And I wanted you to know that you don't have to, that we're with you. Whatever comes. He left before she could respond. Celine sat in the silence, holding her cup, feeling the weight of his words settle alongside all her doubts and fears and desperate plans. He was right about one thing. She was planning something reckless, because sitting here waiting for the next attack wasn't an option, and she was tired of letting fear dictate strategy. The old woman had taught her to hunt, had trained her to track and kill and survive in the harshest conditions. Time to put those lessons to use. Celine stood, began gathering supplies. Weapons, rations, the tools of a hunter going into dead ground. If the enemy was hiding in the Blackstone Peaks, she'd drag them out, end this shadow war before it bled her coalition dry. The door opened again without knocking. Raven stood in the entrance, arms crossed, expression knowing. "You're not going alone," she said flatly. "I can't risk. If you say you can't risk us, I'm going to hit you." Raven walked in, started checking Celine's weapons with professional efficiency. "You're our queen, our friend, and you're walking into a trap so obvious even a pup could see it. So either we all go or none of us do. The trap is the point." Celine's jaw tightened. "Whoever's doing this wants me specifically. If I show up alone, they might reveal themselves. And then kill you. Great plan. I'm harder to kill than I used to be." "So are we." Raven met her eyes. "You taught us that. Now stop being a martyr and let your pack actually help you." Before Celine could argue, more footsteps. Frost appeared in the doorway. Then the general. Then a dozen of her best warriors, all armed, all ready. They filled her small room, these wolves who'd chosen to follow her, and their message was clear. Wherever she was going, she wasn't going alone. Kael was the last to arrive. He didn't say anything, just handed her a better blade than the one she'd been packing. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and something passed between them. Not the bond. That was dead. But understanding, partnership. The recognition of two people who destroyed each other and somehow built something better from the ruins. "Fine," Celine said. Her throat was tight. "But we move fast and quiet, in and out before they know we're there." "When do we leave?" Frost asked. "Now." Celine strapped on the blade, felt its weight settle against her hip. "Before I can talk myself into something smart instead of necessary." They moved through the camp like ghosts, 20 wolves, the best Celine had, slipping into the darkness beyond the settlement's borders. Behind them, the rest of the coalition slept, unaware their queen was walking into enemy territory with a handful of warriors and a plan that barely qualified as a plan. The Blackstone Peaks rose in the distance, dark shapes against darker sky. The land around them grew desolate as they traveled. Grass gave way to bare rock, trees twisted into wrong shapes, poisoned by old magic that had soaked into the ground during the Moonborn Purge. Nothing lived here. Nothing should. But someone was. Celine could feel it. A wrongness in the air that had nothing to do with the cursed ground. They found the first body 2 miles into the Deadlands. Another wolf, freshly killed, displayed the same way as the ones in Celine's territory. But this one was different. This one wore the colors of Magnus's southern pack. "He came looking for answers," Frost observed quietly. "The scout Marcus sent ahead 3 days ago. The one who never reported back." Celine knelt beside the corpse, studying the wounds. Professional. Efficient. Whoever killed him knew exactly how to inflict maximum pain while keeping him alive long enough to talk. "What did they want from you?" she wondered. "What did you tell them before you died?" Movement in the rocks above them. Fast. Multiple targets. Celine's hand went to her blade just as the first attacker dropped from the cliffs. Wolf form. Massive. Moving with trained precision. Not raiders. Soldiers. The ambush erupted. Wolves poured from hidden positions, a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm through numbers and surprise. Celine's warriors met them with the discipline she'd drilled into them. No panic. No chaos. Just brutal, efficient violence. Celine fought at the center, blade singing, moonfire held in reserve. She'd learned her lesson about relying too much on power. These enemies wanted her to burn bright, to exhaust herself before the real threat revealed itself. So she fought like a wolf instead of a goddess, claws and teeth and steel. An attacker lunged for her throat. She ducked under, drove her blade up through his ribs, felt the impact shudder through her arms. He fell. Another took his place. Then another. They kept coming, an endless stream of trained killers all focused on her. This wasn't random. This was execution. "Fall back," Kyle shouted. "They're trying to separate us." He was right. The attackers were driving wedges between Celine's group, isolating individuals. Classic pack hunting tactics. But Celine's warriors held formation, protecting each other's backs, refusing to break. Then the moonfire came. Not from Celine. From the cliffs above. Silver flames erupted across the battlefield, cold and devastating, and Celine's heart stopped because she knew that fire. Knew the signature of the wolf wielding it. The old woman stepped into view, standing on an outcropping 50 feet up, moonfire blazing around her like a crown. "Did you really think I'd simply walk away?" she called down. "That I'd let you waste centuries of planning for your pathetic little council experiment?" Celine backed toward her people, blade ready. "You're behind this. The attacks. The bodies." "I'm behind everything, child. Always have been." The old woman's smile was terrible. The rejection, the awakening, even your precious new order. All of it calculated to bring you to this moment, to force you to choose between your principles and your people's survival. Around them, the attacking wolves pulled back, not retreating, surrounding. Celine counted at least 50. All trained, all loyal to the woman on the cliff. "You can't win this fight as you are now," the old woman continued. "Can't protect them with half measures and restrained power. So here's your choice. Embrace the full Moonborn legacy. Become the weapon I trained you to be. Or watch everyone you care about die while you cling to mercy that serves no one. Never." Celine's voice was steel. "I'd rather die free than live as your puppet." "Then die you shall." The old woman raised her hand. But not quickly, not cleanly. You'll watch them fall first. Starting with him. Moonfire erupted toward Kyle. Celine moved on instinct, throwing herself between him and the flames. The moonfire hit her chest, cold and agonizing, designed not to kill but to paralyze. She went down hard, gasping, nerves screaming. Through the haze of pain, she saw the old woman's forces advance. Saw her warriors brace for a fight they couldn't win. Saw Kyle reaching for her, shouting something she couldn't hear over the roar in her ears. This was the trap, not the ambush, not the location. This. The choice between principles and survival, between staying herself and becoming the monster that could save them. Celine had spent 4 months running from that choice, had convinced herself there was a middle path, a way to be strong without being consumed. But looking at her people surrounded by superior numbers, looking at the old woman who'd orchestrated every moment of suffering to force this exact decision, she finally understood the truth. Some choices couldn't be avoided, only delayed. The moonfire in her blood stirred, hungry, ready. It had been waiting for this, waiting for the moment she'd have no choice but to unleash everything and damn the consequences. Celine closed her eyes, felt the power rising like a tide, felt herself standing at the edge of something she couldn't come back from. Once she let the full force out, once she became the weapon, there would be no restraint, no mercy, just devastating power wielded by something that used to be a person. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked the old woman silently. "To break me so completely I'd have no choice but to become you?" But as the moonfire built to critical mass, as her body prepared to transform into something beyond mortal limits, Celine felt something else. Kyle's hand finding hers despite the paralysis. Raven's presence at her back, ready to fight even against impossible odds. Her warriors forming a protective circle, choosing to stand with her instead of running. They weren't waiting for her to save them. They were choosing to fight beside her, as equals, as pack. And in that moment, Celine realized the old woman had made a fundamental miscalculation. She'd spent centuries planning for a queen who ruled alone, who wielded absolute power because she had no one to share it with. But Celine wasn't alone, hadn't been since the moment she'd stopped trying to control everything and started trusting her people to fight their own battles. The moonfire exploded outward, not as a weapon, as a signal. Silver flames erupted in a column visible for miles, burning cold and bright into the night sky. A beacon, a call to arms. Every wolf in her coalition would see it, would know their queen needed them. The old woman's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. "What are you doing?" Celine dragged herself upright, moonfire still blazing around her but controlled, directed. She met the old woman's eyes across the battlefield. "Proving you wrong," she said. "You built an empire on the idea that power had to be absolute, that one wolf had to command all others. But I built something different, something you never understood. I built a pack. The ground shook, not from magic, from thousands of feet hitting earth in synchronized rhythm. Celine's coalition was coming, every warrior, every civilian who could fight. They'd seen the signal and responded, racing toward the Blackstone Peaks with everything they had. The old woman's forces looked nervous now. 50 trained killers were terrifying. But against an army united by choice instead of compulsion? "You taught me to hunt," Celine continued. "Taught me to kill. But you forgot to teach me the most important lesson. Power means nothing if you're alone. And I'm not alone anymore." Wolves poured into the Deadlands from every direction. Celine's coalition, Magnus's southern pack, Stone's mountain wolves. Even some of the neutral territories that had been watching and waiting sent forces. Thousands of wolves converging on this cursed ground, all of them choosing to answer the call. The old woman stared at them, finally understanding what she was facing. Not one powerful wolf she could manipulate or destroy. An entire movement, an idea that had taken root too deep to burn out. "You can kill me," Celine said. "Maybe even win this battle. But you can't kill what we've built. It's bigger than me now, bigger than any one wolf. And that's something you'll never understand." The moonfire around her intensified, not with rage, but with certainty, with the absolute conviction of someone who'd found something worth dying for. "So here's my choice," Celine said. "Not the one you wanted. The one I'm making. We fight. All of us. Together. And whether we win or lose, whether I survive or fall, this experiment continues. Because it was never about me. It was about proving that wolves could be better than what you made us." She raised her blade, moonfire dancing along its edge. "And we are better. All of us. Even those who followed you out of fear or manipulation. Because at the end, everyone has a choice. Everyone can decide who they want to be." Celine looked at the 50 wolves surrounding them, saw uncertainty in some faces, recognition in others. "You're following her because you're scared," she called out, "or because you owe debts, or because she promised you power. But look around. Look at what we've built. Look at wolves who were enemies standing together by choice. Ask yourself which future you actually want." 3 of the old woman's wolves broke formation, stepped back. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. Not joining Celine's side, just refusing to fight, choosing neutrality over compulsion. The old woman's face twisted with fury. "Traitors. All of you. I gave you everything. You gave us chains," one of the deserting wolves said. "Pretty ones. But chains all the same." The old woman raised both hands, moonfire erupting in devastating waves. "If I can't have my empire, then no one gets anything. I'll burn it all, every last one of you, starting with her." The flames roared towards Celine, enough power to incinerate everything in a 100-yard radius, enough to end this entire battle in one strike. Celine didn't run, didn't dodge. She stood her ground, blade ready, moonfire blazing, and reached for her people through the connection they'd built. Not magical, not compulsion, just trust, just pack. "With me," she said. And they answered. Every wolf who could channel even a spark of moonborn heritage unleashed it simultaneously. Dozens of individual flames combining into something massive, something that met the old woman's attack head-on and matched it, not overpowering, equalizing. The collision of forces was blinding, silver fire everywhere, the ground cracking, the cursed rock of the Blackstone Peaks shattering under the pressure of ancient magic wielded by too many sources at once. When the flames cleared, both sides still stood. Battered, exhausted, but standing. The old woman stared at Celine across the scorched battlefield. For the first time in centuries, genuine emotion crossed her face. Not anger, grief. "You were supposed to be mine," she whispered. "My legacy. My redemption." "I'm my own," Celine replied. And that's the only legacy that matters. The old woman's form began to dissolve. Not dying, just leaving, retreating into whatever shadow she'd emerged from. But before she vanished completely, she spoke one last time. This isn't over. Empires fall slowly, piece by piece, choice by choice. And when yours crumbles, when your precious ideals can't stand against reality, I'll be waiting. Then wait, Celine said. We'll still be here. The old woman disappeared. Her remaining forces scattered, some fleeing into the Deadlands, others surrendering. The battle was over. Not won. Not lost. Just over. Celine's legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, every muscle screaming, moonfire finally dying in her blood. Around her, her people collapsed in similar exhaustion. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, against ancient power, against destiny itself. They'd survived. Kael crawled to her side, bleeding from a dozen wounds. We did it. We're alive, Celine corrected. That's not the same as winning. It is today. He smiled, tired and real. Tomorrow we can worry about the rest. Tomorrow. The word felt heavy, full of promises and threats in equal measure. The old woman was right about one thing. Empires did fall slowly, and Celine's was still being built, still fragile, still vulnerable to all the forces that wanted to crush it. But looking at her people, these wolves who'd chosen to fight beside her instead of for her, Celine felt something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Hope. Not the naive kind she'd carried as a young Luna. The hard kind. The kind that survived rejection and betrayal and impossible battles. The kind that looked at overwhelming odds and said, not today. Raven appeared, limping but alive. Casualties? 17 dead, 43 wounded. The general's voice was hoarse. Could have been worse. Could have been better. Celine forced herself upright despite her body's protests. Get them medical attention. Set up a perimeter. And someone find Magnus. I need to know if those southern packs are still with us, or if watching me nearly die convinced them to bail. They'll stay, Magnus himself said, walking up covered in blood that wasn't his. Because you just proved something I didn't think was possible. You proved that standing together actually works. That it's not just pretty words and wishful thinking. He offered his hand. Celine stared at it for a moment, then clasped it. Not as queen and subject, as equals. One season, she reminded him. That was the deal. One season, he agreed. But after tonight? I'm thinking we might need to renegotiate, extend it to 2, maybe 3. See where this goes. It was the closest thing to a commitment she'd get from a Southern alpha. Celine would take it. Around them, wolves began the grim work of tending wounded and counting dead, of processing what they'd survived. The Blackstone Peaks would never be the same. The cursed ground had been churned to ash by moonfire. The rocks split and scattered. Centuries of old magic burned away in one desperate battle. Maybe that was fitting, the old world dying to make room for the new. Celine stood on that scorched battlefield, surrounded by her people, and let herself feel the full weight of what they'd done. Not just survived. Chosen. Chosen to stand together against forces that should have crushed them. Chosen principle over safety. Chosen each other. That was worth something, maybe everything. The sun was rising now, pale light touching the edges of the Deadlands. A new day. Another chance to prove the old woman wrong. To build something that lasted not because one powerful wolf commanded it, but because thousands of ordinary wolves chose it. Celine took a breath, felt the moonfire settling in her blood, exhausted but still there. Still ready. A tool, not an identity. Power she could wield without being consumed by it. She'd walked to the edge of becoming a monster and stepped back. Had refused absolute power twice now. Some wolves would call that weakness. The old woman certainly did. But standing here with her people, with wolves who trusted her because she'd earned it instead of commanded it, Celine knew the truth. Restraint wasn't weakness. It was the hardest kind of strength, and she'd need every bit of it for what came next. Because the battle was over. The war had just begun. Kael touched her shoulder. We should head back, get you medical attention. In a minute. Celine's eyes swept the battlefield one last time. Memorizing, processing, learning. I need to remember this. Remember what? What we're capable of when we stand together. What we can survive. She turned to face him. Because this won't be the last time someone tries to destroy what we've built. There will be more battles, more impossible choices, more moments where giving up looks easier than holding on. And I need to remember we've already survived the worst. Everything else is just details. She started walking toward her people, toward the future they were building together, step by painful step. Kael fell in beside her, neither leading nor following, just walking together. Behind them, the Blackstone peaks smoldered, cursed ground finally cleansed by fire that burned cold and bright. Ahead, the coalition waited, fragile and imperfect and real. Celine's empire of choice. And she would defend it with everything she had, not because she had to, because she chose to. The difference was everything. The reconstruction took 3 months. Celine stood on the ridge where she'd first watched the Southern Coalition arrive, looking down at what her people had built from the ashes. The valley was transformed, not back to what it was, into something new. Council chambers constructed from salvaged stone, training grounds where wolves of all ranks sparred together, schools where pups learned to read alongside combat techniques, medical centers staffed by healers from a dozen different packs. It wasn't perfect. Nothing built by mortal hands ever was, but it was real. And it was theirs. The cost had been devastating. 143 wolves dead in the battle at Blackstone Peaks, another 62 succumbing to wounds in the weeks after, 205 lives spent purchasing the right to try something different. Celine knew every name, had attended every memorial, had looked families in the eyes and told them their loved ones hadn't died for nothing. Some believed her. Others just stared with the hollow expressions of people who'd lost everything and couldn't find meaning in the wreckage. She understood that. Had worn that expression herself once, standing in the snow after Kael rejected her, trying to find a reason to keep breathing. The difference was she'd found that reason, had clawed it out of frozen ground and moonfire, and the absolute refusal to let cruelty be the final word. But not everyone could do that. Not everyone should have to. Footsteps behind her. Celine didn't turn. She recognized the gait, the careful approach of someone who'd learned not to startle a wolf with too much power and too little sleep. "You've been standing here for 2 hours," Raven said. "The council meeting starts soon." "I know." Celine's eyes tracked the movement in the valley below. Wolves working together, building together, some from her original coalition, others from territories that had been enemies a year ago. All of them choosing this, choosing her vision of something better. "I'm just trying to remember why we're doing this. Because the alternative is worse. Is it?" Celine's voice was quiet. 205 dead, countless wounded, families destroyed, territory scarred. And for what? So we can rebuild a system that might collapse the moment I'm gone? So we can pretend that councils and equality can stand against wolves who want power and don't care who they crush to get it? Raven was silent for a moment. Then she moved to stand beside Celine, looking out over the valley. "My first pack sold me to raiders when I was 12, she said. Payment for safe passage through their territory. The raiders used me until I was old enough to fight back. Then I killed 3 of them and ran. Lived alone for 6 years. Nearly died a dozen times. Finally found another pack that took me in. They were better, kinder. But I was still property, still expendable. Still less because I'd been broken." She turned to face Celine. "You asked me once why I follow you. I told you it was because you asked my opinion. Made me feel like a person, but that's not the whole truth. I follow you because you're the first wolf who looked at someone like me and saw strength instead of damage, saw potential instead of liability. You didn't just accept me despite my past. You valued me because of what I'd survived." Raven's scarred face was fierce in the morning light. "So when you ask if this is worth it, if 205 lives purchased anything real, my answer is yes. Because every wolf in that valley has a story like mine, has been crushed or cast aside or told they weren't enough. And you gave them a place where their survival meant something, where their scars were proof of strength instead of marks of shame. That's worth dying for," she finished. "That's worth everything." Celine's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could still fail. All the enemies still circling, all the wolves who'd never accept change no matter how much blood was spilled purchasing it. But looking at Raven, at the absolute conviction in her eyes, Celine recognized something she'd been missing. She'd been so focused on the cost that she'd forgotten to measure the value. had spent 3 months cataloging deaths instead of honoring what those deaths had purchased. The right for wolves like Raven to exist without apology. The chance for pups to grow up believing they mattered regardless of strength or rank. The possibility that cycles of violence and oppression could actually end instead of just wearing different faces. That was worth something, maybe everything. "Thank you," Celine said quietly. "I needed to hear that. I know." Raven's expression softened. "Now come on. Magnus is probably already at the council chamber complaining about having to wait." They walked down into the valley together. Wolves called out greetings as they passed, some formal, others casual. A few pups ran past, laughing, playing a game that looked like war but felt like joy. Normal life continuing despite everything. Because of everything. The council chamber was packed when they arrived. Representatives from 47 different packs, all squeezed into a space meant for 30. Magnus sat near the front, looking irritated but present. Stone from the mountain pack had claimed a corner, surrounded by her most trusted advisors. And there, near the center, sat Kael. He looked better than he had 3 months ago. The wounds from Blackstone had healed. The exhaustion had faded. But something in his eyes remained haunted. Celine recognized that look, saw it in her own reflection every morning. The look of someone who'd seen what they could become and barely stepped back from the edge. Their eyes met across the crowded room. A year ago, that look would have sparked the bond, would have sent warmth flooding through her chest. Now it just created a different kind of connection. Understanding between two people who'd destroyed each other and somehow ended up on the same side of something impossible. Kael nodded once. Celine returned it. Then she moved to the front of the chamber where a simple chair waited. Not a throne, just a seat like any other. The symbolism was deliberate. The room quieted as she settled into place. 47 packs worth of eyes locked onto her, waiting. Some with hope, others with skepticism. All of them looking to her for direction. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, Celine felt something close to peace. She wasn't carrying this alone anymore. Wasn't trying to force a vision through sheer power and will. These wolves had chosen to be here. Had chosen to try. That made all the difference. "We've called this council to address 3 issues," she began. First, the Southern Territories have formally requested full integration into the coalition. Second, we've received word that Eastern packs are watching our progress and considering similar restructuring. Third, there are rumors of Old Guard alphas organizing resistance. We need to decide how to handle each. The debate that followed was fierce. Voices raised. Arguments made and countered. Magnus wanted aggressive expansion, bringing in territories before they could be turned against the coalition. Stone advocated caution, worried about growing too fast and losing cohesion. Others fell somewhere between. Celine listened more than she spoke. Let the council find its own rhythm. Her role wasn't to command, it was to guide, to ask questions that forced deeper thinking, to challenge assumptions without imposing answers. This was the hard part. Not the dramatic battles or moonfire displays. This grinding daily work of building consensus, of finding compromise between competing interests, of making decisions that would disappoint some wolves while satisfying others, of accepting that progress was measured in inches instead of miles. It was exhausting, frustrating, nothing like the clean simplicity of combat. It was also everything she'd been fighting for. After 4 hours, they reached consensus. The Southern Territories would be welcomed with a probationary period. Envoys would be sent east to share information without demanding commitment. And the Old Guard resistance would be monitored but not preemptively attacked. Give them rope to either hang themselves or climb to understanding. Not perfect solutions, but workable ones, built through cooperation instead of domination. As the council dispersed, Kael approached. "Can we talk? Privately?" Celine considered refusing, considered a dozen excuses to avoid whatever conversation he wanted. But she'd spent too long running from difficult things. Time to face them. My quarters, 1 hour. She used that hour to walk the valley, to check on the medical center where wounded wolves still recovered, to visit the memorial stone where 205 names were carved in granite, to remind herself what all this was for. When she returned to her quarters, Kael was already waiting. He'd brought food, simple bread and cheese, knowing she'd probably skipped meals again. The gesture was thoughtful, familiar in a way that hurt. Celine took the offered food without comment. They ate in silence for a few minutes, both aware they were delaying whatever needed to be said. Finally, Kael spoke. I'm stepping down from the council. Celine's head snapped up. What? Why? Because I'm a liability. Kael's expression was calm, but his hands were tense. Every time I speak, half the room hears Alpha King instead of council member. My presence undermines what you're trying to build. A system where rank doesn't determine worth. You've earned your place. The council voted to keep you. They voted out of gratitude, because I stood with you at Blackstone. But gratitude isn't the same as trust, and this system needs trust to function, so you're running away. I'm recognizing reality. Kael met her eyes. I spent my whole life being groomed to rule, to command, to expect obedience. I can suppress those instincts, but I can't erase them. And every time I open my mouth in council, those old patterns influence how people respond to me. That's not fair to them or to the system we're trying to create. Then retrain. Unlearn the patterns. Celine's voice was sharper than she intended. Don't give me this noble sacrifice routine. If you want to leave, leave. But don't pretend it's for everyone else's benefit. Kael flinched. You're right. That's not the whole truth. He stood, paced to the window, looked out at the valley below. The truth is, I don't know who I am without the throne, without the title, without the power that defined me for 30 years. And watching you build this, watching you be the leader I never could be, it's like staring into a mirror that shows all my failures. That's not It is. Kael turned back to face her. You asked me once what I wanted. I told you I wanted you to survive with your soul intact. But what I didn't say is that I need to figure out who I am with mine. Need to learn to exist as just Kael, not Alpha King, not mate to the Moonborn Queen, just a wolf trying to be better than he was. Celine studied him, saw genuine struggle in his expression, genuine pain. A year ago, she would have softened, would have tried to fix him or comfort him or take responsibility for his healing. But she'd learned the hard way that you couldn't save people from themselves, could only stand beside them while they did the work. So what will you do? She asked. Travel. Learn. Try to understand territories beyond these. See how other packs handle governance. Maybe find examples we can learn from. Kael's voice steadied. I'll be more useful to the coalition as a scout than as a constant reminder of the old system. And maybe along the way I'll figure out how to be someone worth being. How long? A year. Maybe 2. He met her eyes. I'll send reports, stay in contact with the council, but I need distance, from the throne, from the palace, from you. The last words landed heavy. Celine felt them in her chest where the bond used to live. But there was no pain now, just acknowledgement of reality. Whatever they'd been to each other was gone. What they could become was still undefined. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some relationships weren't meant to be fixed or rebuilt, just recognized for what they were and gently released. I understand, she said. When do you leave? Dawn. Tomorrow. Kael's smile was sad. I wanted to tell you first, before announcing to the council. I appreciate that. Celine stood, moved to face him. For what it's worth, I think this is the right choice. For both of us. Really? Really. You need to find yourself outside the shadow of what you were, and I need to lead without the ghost of what we could have been hanging over every decision. This gives us both clean breaks. Kael nodded slowly. Then I have one more thing to say. One more truth before I go. He took a breath. I loved you. Really loved you. Not the bond, not the destiny or the politics or the strategy. You. The woman who stayed up all night caring for sick wolves, who taught pups to read, who believed kindness was strength. I loved her. And destroying that love is the biggest regret of my life. Celine felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't let them fall. I know, and for a long time I hated you for it, hated what you took from me, but I've learned something over these past months. Something important. What? That love isn't enough. Celine's voice was steady. You loved me and still chose politics over bond. I loved you and still became someone you barely recognize. Love doesn't fix broken systems or heal centuries of trauma or create equality where none existed. It's not the foundation. It's just one piece of a much bigger structure. So what is the foundation? Choice? Respect. The daily decision to see each other as equals instead of roles to fill. We never had that. We had bond and attraction and duty, but we never chose each other as people, just accepted destiny and tried to make it work. And now? Now we both get to choose who we become without each other. Celine smiled, small and genuine. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one. Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and did something unexpected. He bowed. Not the shallow political bow of alphas, the deep, full bow of genuine respect. Thank you, he said, for surviving me, for becoming this, for showing me what real strength looks like. Celine touched his shoulder. When he straightened, she met his eyes one last time. Travel well, Kyle Shadowfang. Figure out who you are. And when you come back as someone you're proud to be. I will. He turned toward the door, paused. One last question? Ask. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Really forgive me? Celine considered the question, turned it over in her mind like a stone, examining its weight and shape. A year ago, she would have said never. 3 months ago, she would have said maybe. Now, standing here watching him prepare to walk away, she found a different answer. I already have, she said quietly. Not because you earned it or because enough time passed, but because holding on to that anger was destroying me. Forgiveness isn't for you, Kale. It's for me. It's choosing to stop letting the worst moment of my life define every moment after. She met his eyes. So yes, I forgive you, and more than that, I release you. From guilt, from obligation, from whatever debt you think you owe. Go. Build yourself into someone new, and if our paths cross again, let it be as equals who chose to reconnect, not as broken mates bound by shared trauma. Kale's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you. For that. For everything. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Celine stood alone in her quarters, feeling the ghost of the bond settle into memory. It didn't hurt anymore. Didn't ache. Just existed as part of her history. Something that had happened. Something she'd survived. She walked to the window. Below, the valley was settling into evening. Fires lit in hearths. Families gathering for meals. The mundane miracle of ordinary life continuing despite everything that had tried to destroy it. Tomorrow, Cale would leave on his journey. The council would continue its work. New challenges would emerge because they always did. The old guard would make their move eventually. Other territories would test the coalition's strength. The work of building something better would grind forward in endless small battles that never made songs or legends. And Celine would face all of it. Not as someone trying to prove she was worthy. Not as someone running from who she'd been, but as someone who'd walked through fire and chosen herself on the other side. The moonfire stirred in her blood. Still there. Still powerful. But quiet now. A tool she could wield without being consumed by it. Power she'd earned through suffering and chose to restrain through wisdom. That was the real victory. Not the battles won or the empire built. The choice to remain herself despite every pressure to become something else. To hold on to mercy when cruelty was easier. To build when destruction was simpler. To forgive when hatred felt righteous. A knock at the door pulled her from reflection. Come in. Raven entered, followed by Frost and the general. All three wore expressions that meant business. We have a situation, Raven said. Scouts report movement from the old guard. They're consolidating forces about 100 miles south. Looks like they're preparing for something big. How big? 3,000 wolves, maybe more. The general's voice was grim. All traditionalists, all loyal to the old Alpha system, and they're calling themselves the Restoration Army. The name says it all. Celine absorbed the information, processed the threat. 3,000 wolves meant another war. More death, more territory scarred, more families destroyed. The cycle beginning again because some wolves would rather burn the world than see it change. She could feel the moonfire ready to rise, could imagine the battle already, the strategy needed, the sacrifices required, could see herself walking back onto the field at Blackstone and making the same choice. Stand and fight. Bleed for every inch. Prove through violence that the new order could survive. But standing there, looking at her commanders, Celine felt something shift, a different kind of strength rising. Not the kind that came from moonfire or ancient bloodlines, the kind that came from knowing when to fight and when to find another path. Send envoys, she said, to the Restoration Army leadership. Tell them we want to talk. Talk? Frost looked incredulous. They're called the Restoration Army. They want to destroy everything we've built. Then let them say it to our faces. Let them explain why. Let them make their case in front of witnesses from neutral territories. Celine's voice was steady. We've proven we can win battles. Now we need to prove we can win without them. And if they refuse to talk, the general asked, if they attack anyway, then we defend ourselves. But we try diplomacy first, because the moment we stop trying, the moment we default to violence as our first answer, we become what they accuse us of being, just another power structure that maintains itself through force. Raven studied her. This is risky. If they see attempts at peace as weakness, they might. Celine met her eyes, or they might see it as strength, as confidence that our ideas can stand on their own without constant enforcement through violence. Either way, we try, because that's what separates us from the old system. We actually mean it when we say every wolf matters, even the ones trying to destroy us. The room was silent. Then slowly, Frost nodded. I'll draft the envoy message. Make it formal. Make it clear we're serious. I'll select the envoy team, the general added. Wolves who can defend themselves if it goes wrong, but who'll prioritize diplomacy. And I'll make sure our defenses are ready, Raven said, just in case talking doesn't work. They dispersed to their tasks. Celine remained at the window, watching night settle over the valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Restoration Army, Kael's departure, the endless grind of building consensus and maintaining peace, the daily choice to be better than the forces trying to drag them back. It was exhausting just thinking about it. It was also exactly what she'd fought for. The right to face problems through choice instead of compulsion, through dialogue instead of domination, through the messy, frustrating, imperfect process of actually treating wolves like people instead of assets to be managed. Celine closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd become. Not the weapon the old woman wanted, not the perfect queen from fairy tales, not the broken Luna who'd been rejected and cast aside. Just Celine, scarred and powerful and flawed and trying. Building something that might outlast her, might even succeed, but would definitely mean something whether it did or not. Because at the end, meaning wasn't measured in victories or territory or power accumulated. It was measured in choices made. In moments when cruelty was easy and mercy was hard and you chose mercy anyway. In times when violence would solve problems and you tried talking first. In the daily decision to see wolves as individuals deserving of respect instead of obstacles to overcome. That was the empire she was building. Not one that would be remembered in songs or legends, one that would live in the small moments. The pup who grew up believing their worth wasn't determined by strength. The wolf who'd been cast aside and found acceptance. The enemy who was offered understanding instead of execution. Those were the victories that mattered, the ones that actually changed things. The moonfire in Celine's blood settled into quietude, ready when needed. Silent until then. Power held in reserve because true strength wasn't about constant display. It was about restraint, about knowing when to burn and when to build, when to fight and when to forgive. She'd learned those lessons in blood and ice and moonfire, had earned them through rejection and rebirth and the absolute refusal to become the monster that would have been easier. And now she'd teach them, not through force or compulsion, through example, through the daily choice to be better, even when worse was simpler. The door opened one final time. Celine turned, expecting another crisis or problem or challenge that needed solving. Instead, she found Magnus standing in the entrance, looking uncomfortable in a way that would have been funny if it wasn't so genuine. I came to say something, he said without preamble. Something I should have said 3 months ago. Celine waited. Let him find the words. I was wrong about you, Magnus continued. Thought you were just another ambitious wolf playing at revolution. Thought the moment things got hard, you'd abandon principles for power. But watching you these past months, watching you choose diplomacy over domination even when violence would be easier, I was wrong. He stepped fully into the room. You're building something real, something that might actually last. And I want to be part of that, not just for one season, permanently. My pack formally joins the coalition, full integration, full commitment. Celine felt something loosen in her chest. One more pack choosing this, choosing her vision of something better. It wasn't validation. She didn't need external approval anymore. but it was confirmation that the work mattered, that the sacrifice wasn't wasted. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." "Don't thank me yet." Magnus smiled grimly. "My warriors are traditionalists. Half of them will hate this. Retraining them to think beyond dominance hierarchies is going to be brutal. Then we'll be brutal together." Celine offered her hand. "Welcome to the hard part." Magnus clasped it. "To the hard part. And to the woman brave enough to choose it." After he left, Celine stood alone in the gathering dark and let herself feel everything. The grief for what she'd lost, the hope for what she was building, the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the satisfaction of meaningful work. All of it mixed together into something complex and real and utterly human. She'd started this journey as a rejected mate trying to survive rejection, had been reborn in Moonfire as something powerful and terrifying, had walked to the edge of becoming a monster and stepped back, had fought wars external and internal, had lost and won and lost again and somehow kept standing. And now she was just Celine, building an empire from scratch, making it up as she went, getting some things right and others catastrophically wrong, learning, growing, trying. It wasn't the story she'd imagined when she first arrived at Shadowfang as a young Luna full of hope and naivete. Wasn't the fairy tale of true mates and happily ever after. It was better, because it was real, built through choice instead of destiny, earned through struggle instead of granted by birthright. Hers in a way the bond never could have been. The moon rose over the valley, silver light touching everything below. Celine stood in that light and felt the ancient power in her blood respond, not demanding release, just acknowledging kinship, moon and wolf and woman all existing in the same space without conflict. She'd found balance, not perfect, not permanent, but real and hard-won and worth defending. Tomorrow would bring the Restoration Army, would bring Kael's departure, would bring 1,000 small challenges and a few large ones, would bring wolves who needed her to be strong in times when strength meant admitting she didn't have all the answers. But tonight, standing in moonlight watching her people settle into peace they'd purchased with blood, Celine let herself rest, let herself be proud of what they'd built, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually created something that would outlast them all. The rejected Luna who'd died in the snow, the moonborn queen who'd risen from ice and fury, the woman who'd chosen mercy over vengeance and built an empire on that choice, all versions of herself. All true. All part of the story that would define not just her life, but the lives of every wolf who came after, who would grow up in a world where worth wasn't determined by strength, where kindness was valued alongside combat skill, where every voice mattered regardless of rank. That was the legacy worth leaving, not power or territory or bloodline, but the simple revolutionary idea that wolves could be better than their worst instincts, could choose cooperation over domination, could build something that didn't require constant violence to maintain. Celine Moonborn, last of the royal line, first of the new order, closed her eyes and let herself feel it all. The weight and the hope and the absolute terrifying freedom of building a future undefined by past patterns. And when she opened them again, she saw dawn breaking over the valley. A new day. Another chance to prove the cynics wrong, to show that change was possible, that empires could be built on choice instead of compulsion. The work would never end. There would always be another crisis, another enemy, another impossible challenge. But standing here, watching her people wake to another day of freedom and possibility, Celine knew one truth beyond doubt. She would face it all, not because she had to, because she chose to. And that choice, renewed each dawn, was the foundation of everything. The empire built not on power or blood or ancient magic, but on the daily decision to be better than yesterday, to try harder, to fail forward, to keep building even when destruction was easier. This was her story, not the one destiny wrote, the one she chose, and it was just beginning.